Chapter 424. Guhan watched as a new toy truck drove in front of him. The truck didn't have many things inside, only a pocket in the back of the truck. This is a dimensional pocket. Guhan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the pocket. This pocket was very similar to the dimensional pocket that Guhan had obtained, which contained the yin-yang swordsmanship technique. It should have been made from the same template. Yes, husband. Open it and see what's in this dimensional pocket. Yi Qing took the dimensional pocket from the back of the truck and handed it to Guhan. Guhan's mind entered the pocket and found that it was filled with all kinds of sword mark imprints needed for deep sword scars. From the most basic ones used to deepen the sword scars to the 9th grade sword scar dust, the 8th grade sword scar crystal, the 7th grade sword scar fragment, the 6th grade sword scar crystal, the 5th grade sword scar raw stone, the 4th grade sword scar gem, the 3rd grade sword scar diamond, the 2nd grade sword scar immortal stone, and the 1st grade sword scar divine stone, they were all included in it. The materials needed for deep sword scars were collectively known as sword mark imprints. Guhan counted the number of sword mark imprints and found that there were only 20 of each type. 20 sword scar dust was nothing. One sword scar dust was only sold for 1 hero coin and could be bought in the quest store. One sword scar crystal was not expensive either. It was only 5 hero coins per sword scar crystal. However, the price of the sword mark fragments and the sword mark crystals would start to double from the original price of 5. Sword scar fragments cost 25 hero coins, sword scar crystals cost 125 hero coins, and so on. In the end, the price of the sword scar divine stone, which could activate the sword lady's ultimate skill, had risen to 390,000 hero coins. Moreover, there was no market for it. It was difficult to find a sword scar divine stone for more than 10 days. Whenever a sword scar divine stone was put up for sale, the surrounding sword wielders would immediately buy it. P.S. The author has spent a lot of time figuring out the price system of the sword scar imprint. Previously, it was mentioned that the 200 sword scar crystals that Ku Rokin used to exchange for information about Guhan are worth 20,000 hero coins. Now that I've corrected it, the real value should be 1,000 hero coins. If 200 of the second-to-last sword scar crystals cost 20,000 hero coins, then a normal ancient sword wielder would never be able to raise their sword maiden to tier 3. That's why I've decided to change the pricing system so that an ordinary ancient sword wielder can raise their ancient sword wielder to around tier 3 after spending their entire lives working hard. Guhan did some calculations. If all the sword marks in the dimensional pocket were to be converted into hero coins, it would be worth more than 9 million hero coins. A treasure sword tier swordsman would not be able to accumulate so many hero coins in their lifetime. Converting it to the modern concept, it was equivalent to someone giving you a gift worth 100 million. This was definitely a gift from a super nouveau riche. 20 of each type of sword scar imprint is just enough for husband to raise Qingpin, Heavenly Reliance, and Fishbowl to tier 1. Husband, you must be careful when you use them. Don't lose too many. Qing'er doesn't have any more, Yi Qing said slowly. Guhan shook his head. You're wrong. Heavenly Reliance and Fishbowl need 5 sword scar imprints each time, while Qingpin only needs 1. Altogether, 11 of each type is enough for me to raise them to tier 1. Why would I need 20? Guhan suddenly stopped speaking. He suddenly remembered what had happened when he gave Qingpin a sword scar imprint in Yuzhong University. When Qingpin had raised his sword scar powder to tier 9, he had used up a total of 10 sword scar powder. This was 10 times more than a normal ancient sword maiden. Although he did not leave a deep sword mark on the poor man from then on, Ji Han was 80 to 90% sure that if he continued to leave a deep mark on this little ancestor in the future, it would probably be the same as when he left a 9th grade mark on the poor man. He would need to use 10 sword marks. The Heavenly Sword and Fishbowl Sword, which were treasured swords, only required 5 of them. The poor sword, on the other hand, had already reached the level of a sword maiden, which was a famed sword. In other words, if he wanted to raise all 3 of Guhan's sword maidens to tier 1, he would not need the normal 11 sword scar powder. 20 sword scar powder was exactly the amount that Yi Qing had given him. Yi Qing's calculation was right. Instead, he had forgotten about the uniqueness of being poor. It seemed that Yi Qing had a very deep understanding of him. He actually knew such a secret as being poor. It seemed that in the future, he would really trust Yi Qing to the extreme. Perhaps this was the trust between husband and wife. Seeing Guhan silently transfer the sword scar powder from his dimensional pocket to his old dimensional pocket, Yi Qing worriedly added, "Husband, you must complete the sword scar powder within 3 days. If you don't complete it within 3 days, I'm afraid that you won't be able to handle the upcoming battle." Battle? Where am I going to fight? Guhan was stunned. After leaving here, he should have followed the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit back to Yuzhong City and then prepare for the 8th Academy tournament that would begin in 10 days. Even if the 8th Academy tournament was indeed going to be a battle, that would only happen in 10 days. Why did Yi Qing say that there would be a battle that he would not be able to handle in 3 days? Thinking of this, Guhan suddenly remembered the news of the fall of Yeyang Fortress. Could it be that Yuan Ku did not stop while he was ahead and intended to further threaten Yuzhong City? A sense of urgency surged in Guhan's heart. He had to leave the trial array as soon as possible and return to Yuzhong City to protect his city. Don't worry, husband. As the saying goes, the boat will cross the bridge when it reaches the end. Even if you leave now, you won't be able to make it in time. Qing'er still has some important things to give you, Yi Qing said as the second door opened. However, this time, there was no toy truck. Instead, Yi Qing walked into the room and soon came out with 2 brocade boxes. Husband, do you still remember this thing? Yi Qing first opened the smallest brocade box. There was nothing else in this brocade box, only a small golden sugar pill was placed in the center of the brocade box. It's actually this. When Guhan saw this little sugar pill, his entire body began to tremble. Of course, Guhan recognized this thing. It was this thing that allowed Guhan to experience what it felt like to be a sword wielder at the level of a fairy sword. In the Wu-Tang Peak instance of Sword Maiden Online, Guhan, who was burnt to a crisp by Zunaida, received this pill from the Wu-Tang sect leader. That pill instantly healed all of his injuries and temporarily gave him 1,000,000 quarks of sword essence, allowing him to experience what it felt like to be a sword wielder at the level of a fairy sword. In the battle with Zunaida, he seemed to have damaged his brain nerves in the end. He needed to go to the medical center to get a health certificate before he could enter the game again. It was because of this health certificate that Guhan met Song Efei for the second time. Guhan remembered that this pill had an awesome name. It was called 6 Transformations Immortal Pill. According to the Wu-Tang sect leader, this was an immortal pill given to Zhong Sanfeng by Taishong Laojun. After eating it, one could become an immortal. Previously, the sword wielder of the Wu-Tang sword faction, who was almost 200 years old, had become an immortal sword wielder after eating a 6 Transformations Immortal Pill. After coming out of the instance dungeon, Guhan had desperately searched for information about the 6 Transformations Immortal Pill. However, Guhan had searched for all the information he could find. Other than a lot of online novels, Guhan could not find any information about the 6 Transformations Immortal Pill. Ji Yuhan changed his way of thinking and tried to find any information about the survivors of Wu-Tang Mountain, but to no avail. After all, 800 years had passed. At that time, the human information system had not been established yet, so it was reasonable that he could not find any information about those people. Originally, Guhan had forgotten about the 6 Transformations Immortal Pill. He thought that it was just a dream in the instance dungeon. It was impossible for him to encounter such an immortal pill in the real world. However, this immortal pill had appeared in Yi Qing's hand and was placed in front of Guhan. This is for me. Even with Ji Yuhan's mental fortitude, he could not help but feel his throat go dry. As long as he consumed that pill, he would be able to become an immortal sword wielder. There was probably no one in this world who could resist such a temptation. Of course it's for you, husband. Yi Qing placed the box in Ji Yuhan's hands. Back then, Yi Qing finally managed to find the descendants of Wudong sect, who had concealed their identities. I tried to reason with them, and finally managed to obtain a 6 Revolutions Immortal Pill from them. All of this was for the sake of giving it to my beloved husband one day. You obtained this from the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect. Guhan held the 6 Transformations Immortal Pill tightly in his hand. He suppressed his desire to swallow it immediately. Are the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect still alive? I don't know how they are now. However, when I found them, they were living rather pathetically. They were always hiding in Yangjing City because they were afraid that their identities would be discovered by those who coveted the 6 transformations immortal pill. I don't know if they are still in Yangjing City. Perhaps they have moved to Yuzhong City. Perhaps they are all dead. Yi Qing did not care about the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect, but Guhan remembered it deeply. Qing, do you still remember where those people live? Guhan asked. Of course I remember, but they should have moved away long ago. Why, do you still want to look for them? Yi Qing smiled. As she spoke, she gave him an address. Of course, Guhan wanted to find them. If the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect were still alive, then the remaining 6 transformations immortal pill should be in their hands. Such a divine item should not be buried in the hands of a group of mortals. The difficult sword era was coming soon. If humans could use these 6 transformations immortal sword wielder to create a few immortal sword wielder, then the lives of humans would be much better. Guhan silently compared the address on his personal terminal. He was surprised to find that although the address and the house number had long disappeared, the name of the road was still marked on the map. Perhaps he could find some clues. Chapter 425. Whether or not you want to find them is your own business. Qing won't blame you for anything. I just hope that you won't force them because they are all alone. They are just a bunch of pitiful people. Yi Qing said after telling Ji Yu Han the news of the Wu-Dang sect survivors. Ji Yu Han nodded and said, that's right. To the descendants of the Wu-Dang sect survivors, the 6 revolutions elixir was more precious than their lives. Even if Guhan could find them after 700 years, they probably wouldn't hand the 6 revolutions elixir to Guhan. If Guhan insisted on getting it, Guhan would have to use some forceful methods. Don't worry. I won't use any underhanded methods. Guhan shook his head. I will exchange with them. Be it wealth, strength, or safety. They will always have something they want to exchange. I understand now. My husband is actually a kind and amiable person. Yi Qing leaned into Guhan's arms. By the way, hubby, you can't take this 6 revolutions elixir before you become an in-name disciple of the Ren School. Disciple of the Ren School? Guhan remembered this term. After he took the 6 revolutions elixir in the dungeon, he obtained the title of an in-name disciple of the Ren School. However, wasn't this title automatically obtained after taking the elixir? Why did he have to obtain this title before he could take this thing? As if she could see the doubt in Guhan's heart, Yi Qing continued to explain, the 6 revolutions elixir can only be taken by the disciples of the Ren School. If you take the 6 revolutions elixir before becoming a disciple of the Ren School, there is a 99% chance that your body will explode and you will die. Of course, if you are lucky enough to encounter the 1% success rate, you can also obtain the title of an in-name disciple of the Ren School, just like hubby in the game. There is such a restriction. Guhan also remembered that the 6 revolutions elixir in the game's attribute panel seemed to have such a description. Item, 6 revolutions elixir grade, divine item, legendary, effect. There is a 1% chance that you will gain 1 million sword essence points after taking it. There is a 99% chance that you will die immediately after taking it. Once they consumed it, they would immediately join Ren School and become an in-name disciple of Ren School. Introduction. An immortal pill refined by the Grand Supreme Elder. Those who are not disciples of Ren School cannot consume it. Then this immortal pill is pretty useless. Guhan's desire for the 6 revolutions immortal pill plummeted when he heard these conditions. Reality wasn't a game. In the game, Guhan could bet on the 1% chance of success. At most, he wouldn't be able to enter the game for 3 days. However, in reality, Guhan was burdened with too many things. He would never bet on the 99% chance of failure. Not necessarily. As long as you can find the heavenly master of the Ren School and let him accept you as a disciple, you will be promoted from an in-name disciple of the Ren School to a disciple of the Ren School. Then, you will be able to safely consume this 6 revolutions elixir, Yi Qing said with a smile. The heavenly master of Ren School? There is no celestial master in this world. Is he Yuan Ku or a human? Guhan heard Yi Qing's words and regained some hope in the pill. 700 years have passed. How would I know where the heavenly master of Ren School is? However, haven't you been looking for the Green Lotus Sword Immortal? As long as you find the Green Lotus Sword Immortal, you will be able to find the heavenly master of Ren School, Yi Qing said with a smile. The Green Lotus Sword Immortal again. Guhan didn't know how many times he had heard of the Green Lotus Sword Immortal's name. Not only did he need to find him for Artoria's whereabouts, but he also needed to find him for his 3 Green Lotus swords. Now, even the 6 Revolutions elixir was in his hands. Who was this Green Lotus Sword Immortal? Why did Guhan feel that everything was related to him? Alright, I'll keep this pill. We'll talk about it after I find the Green Lotus Sword Immortal. Before he found the Green Lotus Sword Immortal, this 6 Revolutions elixir was useless. Of course, if Guhan faced some kind of desperate situation where he would definitely die, like when he faced the invincible Gunaida in the Instance dungeon, he could bet on the 1% chance of eating this 6 Revolutions elixir and fight for that slim chance of survival. However, Guhan would rather never face such a situation where he would have to gamble with his life. There's also this. Yi Qing took out a total of 2 boxes from the room. The first box contained the 6 Revolutions elixir. When he opened the second box, there was a strange grayish-black metal strip. What's this? When Guhan saw this metal strip, he searched his memory and found that there was nothing that could match it. This is the key to your house. Give it to Qing for safekeeping. When Qing sees you again, she will return the key to you. Yi Qing said with a serious expression. This is the key to my house. Guhan subconsciously searched for the door key in his dimensional pocket. No, his house key was still in his dimensional pocket. He hadn't lost it. Moreover, looking at the appearance of the key in Yi Qing's hand, it looked like a simple metal strip. It didn't even have the teeth marks that a key should have. How could it open the door lock? Let me see. Although he still had his doubts, since these words came from Yi Qing's mouth, Ji Yuhan naturally believed 50% of it. Thus, Ji Yuhan picked up the key from the box and put it in his hand to check it carefully. No. You can't take this key. If you want to see it, let Qing help you. Yi Qing hurriedly stopped Guhan and carefully took the key out of the box. Although it was only a small piece smaller than a finger, Yi Qing seemed to use all her strength to pick it up. She was so tired that golden syrup flowed down her forehead. Is this key very heavy? Seeing Yi Qing's difficult appearance, Guhan subconsciously asked. Of course it's heavy. This key weighs 108,000 kilograms. Yi Qing's words were a weight that could frighten people to death. What kind of joke was this? This key was 108,000 jin. Sun Wukong's Jingu Bang was only 13,500 jin. This small key was equivalent to the weight of 8 Rui Jingu Bang. 108,000 jin was equivalent to 54 tons. What did 54 tons mean? It was about the weight of a Type 99 main battle tank. It seemed that it was cute to turn into a girl. I'm off topic. Anyway, Guhan didn't believe that this small key was as heavy as a Type 99 main battle tank. If it really was that heavy, then how dense was this key? It was about 10 tons per cubic centimeter. Then what did 10 tons per cubic centimeter mean? To put it simply, if you put this key in your hand and then gently threw it on the ground, then this key would sink about a meter deep into the ground under the influence of gravity. It was impossible to find an object with such a high density on Earth, even in a laboratory. The laboratory could only compress an object with such a density at the molecular level, which was a volume that could not be seen with the naked eye. Anything larger than that would be impossible to be achieved by human technology. If there was anything in the universe that could reach such a density, then it would be a white dwarf. If you didn't know what a white dwarf was, you could search it on Baidu. It was a very interesting thing. Husband, Qing isn't joking. Before you reach the peak of the famed sword level, don't try to pick this thing up. The strongest great sword, the sword Maiden, had a maximum weight of 10 tons. After reaching the famed sword level, this upper limit could be increased to 100 tons. However, that was for a great sword like the cast cloud iron. For a light sword like the heavenly sword, it could only lift up to 50 tons. Even though Ji Yuhan's physical fitness could reach the standard of a famed sword level with the support of the yin-yang sword technique, it was only above average. There was still a long way to go before he could reach the peak of the famed sword level. If what Yi Qing said was right, if Guhan tried to pick up this key before he reached the peak of the famed sword level, a large hole would probably be pierced through his palm. But from another perspective, although it was very difficult to lift it, Yi Qing was still able to hold such a heavy object firmly in her hand. Didn't that mean that Yi Qing was equivalent to a famed sword-level sword wielder? At this moment, Yi Hu's forehead kept dripping with golden syrup as she lifted the key. She tried to lift the key higher so that Guhan could see it clearly. Guhan carefully looked at the key. There was nothing special about it. Just like the Juzi sword, it was rather simple and unadorned. However, Guhan noticed that the word Jiyu was engraved on the small side of the key. It seemed like this really was the key to Guhan's house. Put it away. I won't touch this key. Guhan gestured for Yi Qing to put the key back. Yi Qing immediately let out a sigh of relief and put the key back into the box. Strangely, when the key was put back into the box, Yi Qing's entire body became relaxed, as if the weight of the key no longer existed, although the box containing the key was still in Yi Qing's hands. Husband, you must know that this key must not leave this box. This box has a floating formation that can offset the weight of the key. As long as this key is placed in the box, it can be carried around at any time. Otherwise, even a dimensional pocket will not be able to withstand such a large density and the space will crack. Yi Qing placed the box in Guhan's hands. The feel of this box in his hands was no different from that of a normal box. Guhan opened the box and looked at the key. Then, he stretched out a finger and tried to push the edge of the key. Although Guhan could not focus all his strength on his finger, with Guhan's current physical fitness, Guhan's finger could still push a weight of 1 or 2 tons. However, this key did not move at all. It was like a house with a sturdy foundation. At this moment, Guhan finally believed that this small key could indeed weigh tens of tons. Chapter 426. Qing, tell me, where is this key? Anyway, it's definitely not the key to my house. According to Yi Qing, this key seemed to be the key to Guhan's house. However, Guhan could clearly tell everyone that this was not the key to his house at all. The weight of his house was not even a fraction of the weight of this key. If the key was inserted, the entire door would probably collapse and smash a huge hole through the entire building. Of course, this is the key to my husband's house. However, it's not the key to my current house. It's the key to my ancestral land. Yi Qing said mysteriously. The words ancestral land deeply stimulated Guhan. Could it be that the ancestral land that Yi Qing mentioned was the mysterious ancestral land of his family that had all traces of its existence erased? Where? Guhan took a deep breath. Where is the door to this key? Where is my ancestral land? You asked Qing this question, but Qing doesn't know how to answer. Yi Qing tilted her head. You've been with Qing for so long, but you've never mentioned anything about your family. You only gave this key to Qing when you were about to separate and asked her to leave it to you. Therefore, Qing doesn't know where your ancestral land is. Did I give you this key? And I didn't tell you about my family? Guhan hesitated for a moment. Then, he closed the box and put the key into his dimensional pocket. Since he didn't tell Yi Qing about his family after returning to the past, it meant that he had to hide it for some reason. He didn't want to tell his current self about it. This also proved how deep the waters of his family were. Perhaps even sword spirits and sword immortals wouldn't be able to understand the story behind it. Don't worry, hubby. Since you asked Qing to give this key to you, it means that you'll need this key sooner or later. When that time comes, everything will come to light. Yi Qing comforted Guhan. I understand. Guhan nodded his head and looked at Yi Qing expectantly. From the Juzi sword at the start, to the sword scar imprint, to the 6 revolutions immortal pill, the clan key. Guhan had obtained many things from Yi Qing that he could never have imagined. He wondered if Yi Qing had anything else that he had yet to give to him. And this. Sure enough, Yi Qing had something to give to Guhan again. But this time, the place where Yi Qing hid the thing surprised Guhan. Yi Qing had actually put her hand into her skirt, and then, one of her hands was constantly twitching and rubbing between the valley of her crotch, as if she was touching herself in an action movie from a certain island country before the cataclysm. As Yi Qing kept touching herself, her expression kept changing. At first, she could still maintain her composure, but later, she gradually fell into a daze. Drops of golden syrup seeped out of her forehead. In the end, she couldn't control her mouth anymore and started to let out soft moans. This was very awkward. Guhan didn't know how to deal with Yi Qing's actions. Should he stop her or not? Faced with this scene, Guhan had completely lost the ability to judge. In the end, he could only let Yi Qing torment his body. After a while, after a long period of panting and spasms, Yi Qing's body finally calmed down. She slowly withdrew her hand from her skirt, but this time, there was a transparent green gem in her hand. "Husband, this is Qing Er's last gift to you." Yi Qing handed the gem to Guhan and said word by word, "Husband, please keep this green onion stone. This is the key to control the whole trial formation. With this stone, husband can control the whole trial formation. Everything in the trial formation will be used by husband." Seeing this green onion stone, Guhan hesitated for a while, but he still took it from Yi Qing's hand. He didn't know where this stone was taken from, but the surface of the stone was covered with a layer of sticky honey. It was really honey. Guhan couldn't help but sniff it. It was indeed a pure smell of honey. It wasn't a descriptive word from a pornographic novel. "Why did you hide it in there?" Although Guhan really wanted to ask this question, after a long time, he finally asked this question: "How do I use this green onion stone? How do I use it to control the whole trial formation? Husband, please put the green onion stone on the green stone ring. The green stone ring will tell husband about the rest." Yi Qing seemed to be a little weak, and her voice started to become weak. She seemed to be unable to stand. Her legs went soft, and she fell on Guhan's body. Guhan caught her and held her in his arms. "Qing, are you okay?" Ji Han ignored Qing Chongshe and looked at Yi Qing with concern. Her body seemed to be in a terrible state. "It's okay, husband. Qing is just a little tired. Husband, quickly use the green onion stone. Qing will be fine after a short rest." Under Yi Qing's repeated persuasion, Guhan placed the green onion stone ring on his finger. Once the green onion stone ring came into contact with the green stone ring, it immediately absorbed the green onion stone ring. The green onion stone ring seemed to become soft mud, and it slowly absorbed the green onion stone ring. Finally, it completely enveloped the green onion stone ring. At this moment, it was like a lightning strike in Guhan's mind. Countless information surged into Guhan's memory. These were the ways to use the green onion stone. It turned out that if humans wanted to use the green onion stone to control the trial formation, they had to have the cooperation of the green stone ring. These two were indispensable. This was also to prevent outsiders from taking control of the trial formation due to some special reasons. With the cooperation of the green stone ring and the green onion stone, Guhan could control the operation of the entire trial formation. He could change the attributes of each room, the route of advancement on the map, the strength of Yuan Ku, whether it was a prop room or an event room. Guhan could even move people in the trial formation from one place to another. In short, in the trial formation, Guhan was like a god. Even if it was an immortal sword wielder, they would not be able to gain any advantage from Guhan in the trial formation. The benefits of this trial formation were not just this. In addition to being able to act like a tyrant within the range of the trial formation, Guhan could also control the memory fragments of Jendi in the trial formation. He could bring these Yuan Ku to the outside world to fight for him. There were a total of 240 Yuan Ku memory fragments in the trial formation. From the lowest mouse level Yuan Ku to the powerful spirit sword wielder, Yuan Ku, who was equivalent to an ordinary spirit sword wielder, Guhan could summon them from the trial formation to Guhan's position at any time to fight for Guhan. To be able to summon a spirit sword wielder to fight for them, most of the Jendi families only had this strength. Other than the top few Jendi families that had immortal sword wielder, the rest of the Jendi families had the highest battle power of a spirit sword wielder. After obtaining the control of the trial formation, Guhan was equivalent to having a powerful strength that was not weaker than the Gendi family. In fact, his battle power was even slightly stronger than the Gendi family. This was because the Gendi family's sword wielder needed to look after too many places, so it was impossible for them to all gather around the patriarch. However, Guhan only needed a thought, and more than 200 Yuan Ku could appear around Guhan at the same time. Who was superior and who was inferior, it was clear at a glance. However, this ability had a huge drawback, and that was, if the memory fragments left the protection of the trial formation and entered the outside world, then they would inevitably be eroded by the external energy. With the protection of the trial formation, these memory fragments could exist for 700 years without disappearing. However, once they lost the trial formation, they could only exist for half an hour at most. After half an hour, no matter what level the memory fragments of Yuan Ku were, they would all dissipate in the air and return to the most basic particle form. Even if they were only brought back to the trial formation for a short second in the outside world, it would not be able to prevent the dissipation of the memory fragments. This was something that could not be reversed once it was triggered. Therefore, if Guhan wanted to use the Yuan Ku in the trial formation, he had to be very cautious. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he could not summon these Yuan Ku. Otherwise, the trial formation that had lost the memory fragments would be meaningless. Although the memory fragments of Yuan Ku in the trial formation were consumables that could not be recovered once used, there were still 3 Yuan Ku that could be used repeatedly. They were the 3 Egyptian gods that Jetian Gendi had left in the trial formation: Bastet, Anubis, and Isis. On the surface, Jetian Gendi had told these 3 unlucky guys that as long as they stayed here until Guhan arrived, he would give them freedom. However, in reality, Jetian Gendi had secretly left a secret hand on them. Their godheads were firmly controlled by the trial formation. As long as Guhan thought about it, these 3 unlucky guys' godheads would explode. Moreover, they would explode completely and irreparably. Without their godheads, they would return to being weak chickens in the dungeon. They couldn't even beat Guhan, who hadn't learned the yin-yang sword tactic, let alone Guhan, whose strength was equivalent to a treasure sword wielder. Therefore, as long as their godheads were in Guhan's hands, they would be forced to obey Guhan's orders. This was the most useful inheritance that Jetian Gendi had left for Guhan. These were 3 Yuan Ku that could reach the universe level after their strength was completely released. With these 3 Yuan Ku by Guhan's side, other than those flood level and desolate level Yuan Ku that Guhan did not dare to provoke, there was no Yuan Ku that Guhan could not deal with. Unfortunately, these 3 Yuan Ku's strength were not even at the meteor level, let alone the universe level. They were only equivalent to the soul level of a top treasure sword wielder. Chapter 427. The matter of the 3 Egyptian deities was complicated, and it was not something that could be controlled by simply threatening them with divinity. Ji Han put this matter aside for the time being. He planned to find the 3 Egyptian deities to solve this problem after leaving the fairytale land. The Shallot Stone's ability to control Yuan Ku was an ability that Guhan was very interested in. Apart from that, the Shallot Stone had another ability that could increase Guhan's life safety factor by 99%. According to the information, the Shallot Stone had the ultimate ability to break through the void and bring the wielder back to the trial formation. This was equivalent to the Hearthstone in World of Warcraft and the Return City in League of Legends. Of course, compared to these 2 abilities, there was still a certain difference. The Hearthstone and the Return City both required a lot of channeling time, but the Shallot Stone's ability was instantaneous. As long as Guhan willed it, the void door could leave and open, and Guhan could return to the trial formation in an instant. One could imagine how precious this ability was. As long as the Shallot Stone was there, unless it was an attack that could kill Guhan instantly without giving him any time to react, Guhan could use the Shallot Stone's power to return to the trial formation. If Guhan had this ability when he faced Medusa, then Guhan would not have faced that life or death crisis and almost lost his life. Of course, a powerful ability came with a powerful price. Once this ability was used, the Shallot Stone would lose all its energy and fall into a deep sleep, and Guhan would also lose control of the trial formation. As for how long it would take for the Shallot Stone to recover its energy, it was unknown. The information did not mention this at all. However, with the powerful energy needed to break through the void, it would take the Shallot stone 10 or 20 years to accumulate enough energy naturally. In fact, Guhan now had a set of double insurance. When Guhan encountered a fatal danger, Guhan's master, Liu Lei, could also use the giant void hand to grab Guhan back. Only when Liu Lei could not make a move would the Shallot stone be used. Anyway, Guhan's life-saving ability had improved greatly. Unless it was a flood level or desolation level Yuan Ku, there was no Yuan Ku that could instantly kill Guhan. After reading all the information, Guhan slowly opened his eyes. He subconsciously touched the sapphire ring on his hand. He looked at it and found that the Shallot stone had automatically embedded itself into the sapphire ring. Without a doubt, this sapphire ring was the most precious thing he had besides the sword lady. It was a treasure that Guhan could not lose. Thank you, Qing. What you did for me is really. Guhan turned his head and wanted to thank Yi Qing, but he found that Yi Qing's whole body was like a roasted chocolate, softly lying on his body. Her eyes were tightly closed, and her mouth was weakly open. She felt like a fish out of water. Qing, what's wrong? Guhan hurriedly wanted to carry Yi Qing in his arms to check on her condition. However, when he carried her, he found that Yi Qing's body was much lighter than before. How can this be? Guhan's heart skipped a beat. He looked below Yi Qing's body. Yi Qing's long legs had disappeared, and her skirt was floating in the air. It was as if Yi Qing's legs didn't exist before. Guhan immediately touched Yi Qing's lower abdomen, and found that Yi Qing's pelvis had completely disappeared. At this moment, Yi Qing was like a paraplegic patient. How can this be? How can this be? For the first time, Guhan began to panic. He began to panic because of a woman. He put Yi Qing on the sofa, and found that the ground where Yi Qing was standing just now was covered with a black sticky liquid. Could it be? A terrifying thought flashed through Guhan's mind. He immediately lifted Yi Qing's skirt, disregarding the difference between a man and a woman. Then, he weakly took a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. Guhan saw that only half of Yi Qing's butt was still on her body. The remaining half of her butt was constantly dripping the black liquid that Guhan saw just now. The speed of this liquid was not slow. In about 10 seconds, Yi Qing's butt had shrunk by a third at a speed visible to the naked eye. After seeing this, if Guhan still didn't understand what had happened, then Guhan would be a complete fool. Yi Qing's body was like a block of ice, constantly melting. Starting from her legs to her butt, and finally, her whole body would melt and turn into a pool of black liquid. Just like Yi Qing had said before. In a few hours, the world would become a pool of stinky water. Guhan looked at the clock. At this time, it had only been more than 30 minutes since Guhan entered the candy house. There was clearly more than 20 minutes left. Why did Yi Qing melt? Why? Husband, are you by Qing's side? Husband. At this time, Yi Qing woke up from her coma again. She raised her hand weakly, as if she was looking for something. Guhan immediately returned to Yi Qing's side, held her raised hand, and hugged her whole body in his arms. He didn't care that the black liquid that melted from her body would stain his snow-white clothes. I'm here, I'm here. Guhan finally understood why in all the TV dramas, when the male and female leads were about to be separated by life and death, it was always the male lead who held the female lead, held her hand, and gazed at her affectionately. Because at this moment, apart from these things, Guhan couldn't do anything else, just like how he faced the death of his parents 12 years ago. I'm so happy, husband actually cried for Qing. At this time, seeing Guhan's sparkling silver eyes, Yi Qing suddenly laughed happily. Husband always looks serious, just like Qing's Prince Charming. Qing thought that husband wouldn't be sad for a body made of candy when Qing was about to leave. I didn't expect to see husband's tears at this time. Qing's more than 700 years of waiting is worth it. Qing. Guhan didn't know what to say at all. Even if he was extraordinarily resourceful, at this time, it was still a mess. Husband, don't blame me. This is Qing's destiny. When this body was made, when Qing's memory was poured into it, Qing knew that everything was destined. To be able to spend half an hour with husband, Qing's life is enough for Qing. Yi Qing's entire body was enveloped in a glow of happiness and satisfaction. Even though she had been created to wait, and this wait had lasted for 700 years, even though these 700 years were only for a short half an hour of reunion, Yi Qing was still so satisfied, a satisfaction that came from the bottom of her heart. How could Guhan not be deeply touched by this scene? In this life, there was such a girl who waited for you to this extent. What regret could there be in this life? What misfortune could there be to say? Qing, you must have lost the green onion stone for this to happen. Guhan took the green stone ring off his finger. Guhan, who had just treated the green stone ring as a treasure, was now not stingy and wanted to return it to Yi Qing. But when Guhan put the green stone ring on Yi Qing's hand, he discovered that Yi Qing's hand also began to melt. At this time, Yi Qing's hand also began to melt, and Guhan's hand was full of the black liquid left behind by Yi Qing's melting. No, husband, the green onion stone is no longer of any use to Qing. Yi Qing struggled with the last of her strength and shook her head. Husband, Qing admits that the core of Qing's body is the green onion stone, but even if I didn't lose the green onion stone, Qing will inevitably melt after an hour. Whether the green onion stone is in Qing's body or not, it will be of no use. Husband, please take this ring back, otherwise Qing will not be at ease even if I leave. Qing, no. Guhan's voice was already a bit choked. His heart was hit hard by Yi Qing's words, and his whole heart was sour. Husband, Qing is not the real Qing. Qing is only a memory. And it's not Qing that disappeared, just this body of Qing. Qing will be like Qing in the game, entering the green stone ring and watching husband slowly grow into an indomitable giant, the greatest Gendi majesty in the world. That way, Qing will be able to reunite with husband in the other world. After saying this, Yi Qing closed his eyes heavily. Then, a beam of light shot out from Yi Qing's forehead and flew into the green stone ring. This beam of light was probably Yi Qing's memory, and as it disappeared, Yi Qing's candy body completely lost its vitality. The remaining half of her body almost instantly turned into a puddle of black liquid, and splashed on the sofa with a clatter. Qing, Yi Qing. Je tiens Gendi. His Majesty Je tiens. Guhan silently recited these names. From today onwards, I, Guhan, owe you my life. Don't worry, I'll definitely go to that world and meet you. After saying this in his heart, Guhan let out a long sigh, and then took out a handkerchief from his dimensional pocket to wipe the tears from his eyes. But just as he wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, another drop of black liquid dripped onto Guhan's face. Guhan looked up, and found that the ceiling of the candy house seemed to be damp, and there were droplets of water that continuously dripped onto the ground. Oh no, Yi Qing is gone, and this candy house can't hold on much longer. I have to leave immediately. With this thought, Guhan decided to leave the candy house, and he gave the sofa one last nostalgic look. Guhan, who originally wanted to pay his respects to Yi Qing, suddenly found that there was an additional dazzling golden sword on the sofa. Chapter 428. I can feel it. Has it finally come into being? In two different places in this world, two dignified figures who looked like Buddha stopped what they were doing at the same time and stared at the direction of Changyang Mountain, as if there was some kind of rare treasure hidden there. Ahem, it's been more than 20 days. Have those little guys finally gained something? An old man with a wrinkled face said to himself, Je tiens, even though countless people suspect that you're hiding the Emperor's sword, I still don't believe it. I think someone as great as you wouldn't disregard the survival of the human race. I didn't expect that I was wrong. That sword has really been hidden by you. But why? Why did he hide such an important sword? He hid it for more than 700 years. At the same time, in London, thousands of miles away from Haotian Gendi, Longsha Gendi was laughing wildly. Ha ha ha, ancestor guessed right. That sword has indeed been hidden by Je tiens. Good, as expected of His Majesty Gendi, whom I, Longsha, admire the most. You really have the guts to hide that sword for more than 700 years. That's delightful and courageous, ha 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 ha. After laughing for a long time, Longsha Gendi finally closed his mouth, and then calmly sat back in front of his TV. Although you, Je tiens Gendi, have hidden it deep enough, it is still in the bag of my city of London. With that little thing around, those little guys are going to suffer. With a rumble, the once colorful candy house finally turned into a pool of black water and no longer existed. Guhan sighed, and then looked at the shining golden sword lady in his hand. Logically speaking, except for the shining golden Genesis splitter, Guhan had not seen any sword that shone as brightly as this one. It was unknown who came up with the awkward-sounding name of Genesis Earth Cleaver Star. Generally speaking, people called it the Cleaver Sword. It was a sword maiden at the immortal sword level. Legend had it that it was the sword of the hero King Gilgamesh. It was now stored in Berlin's Sword Tower. The Sword Lady should be the most dazzling sword lady among all the sword lady pictures that Guhan had seen. Even through the computer screen, Guhan could see the dazzling golden light. Every molecule that made up the sword lady seemed to want to make its own golden light shine, so it was said to be the most dazzling sword lady in the world. Guhan once thought so, but when he saw the sword lady in his hand, he decisively withdrew this idea. Although the sword in his hand did not have the aura of the sword of Paragon, the golden light was completely restrained, hiding the overwhelming aura of a king within his body. Only those who understood swords would be able to see that the golden light on his body was so outstanding, so powerless, that people could not help but want to kneel at the feet of this sword maiden. If the sword lady was said to be a well-dressed and elegant noble son, then the sword Guhan was talking about was probably a hidden dragon in the abyss. It was like Liu Bang, the ancestor of the Han dynasty who molested innocent women in Pei County. The sword was golden in color, and its appearance was not special. It looked the same as most bronze swords from ancient times. But the two sides of the sword's blade were extremely amazing, engraved with all kinds of patterns. The two sides of the sword's blade were engraved with different pictures. The author of these pictures was probably an abstract painter. Even with Guhan's imagination, he could not tell what the pictures were. They were even more Picasso than Picasso. Guhan could only judge based on his own feelings. One side of the sword was probably the sky, the sun, and the moon, while the other side was the mountains, rivers, and grass. This was the limit that Guhan could distinguish. Although there were no pictures on the sword's hilt, lines of extremely small hieroglyphs were written. These words were so small that even a magnifying glass would take up a lot of effort to read them. On the two sides of the sword's hilt, there were more than 1,000 words, and they were the hieroglyphs that took up the most space. From this, one could imagine how small the words engraved on the sword's hilt were. They were about the thickness of a strand of hair. Guhan did not know any hieroglyphs, so he did not know what was written in the words. Guhan only knew that this was an extremely powerful sword. From what Guhan could feel on his skin, the power contained in the sword's blade was thousands, tens of thousands of times more than the Juzi sword. Guhan could not confirm how powerful the sword was, because the sword's power had already surpassed the limit that Guhan could sense. Thousands of times was only Guhan's guess. Could it be that this is the Emperor's sword that His Majesty Hao Tian mentioned? Guhan muttered to himself absent-mindedly. Jiandi's senses could not be wrong. Jiandi said that an Emperor's sword would be born in the training array, so there was an 80 to 90% chance that there really was a Jiandi here. Combined with the power that Guhan could not estimate, Guhan was already 70 to 80% sure that this was the strongest power that humans could control, and it was also the Emperor's sword that protected the survival and development of humans at the end of the world. Emperor's sword, the sword's sword. This was a term that could make all sword-bearers excited just by hearing its name. This was a sword lady that 999% of sword-bearers could only look up to in their lifetime, and they would not even have the chance to see it. This was the thing that all sword-bearers yearned for the most. Even in their next life, the next life after that, even if they had to work hard for others for dozens or hundreds of lifetimes, they would still be willing to obtain it. And now, this thing was in the hands of Guhan. Thinking of this, Guhan could not help but tremble. It would be great if this was my own sword lady, Guhan thought, but he knew that this was impossible. The Juzi sword could be in Guhan's hands, and others would not blame Guhan for anything, because this was the sword lady that Guhan had discovered. Guhan had the right to keep it as his own item while he was still alive. Only after Guhan died, Sword Pavilion would forcefully take back the sword lady. However, If this was really an emperor's sword, then Guhan would not keep it by his side at all, because Sword Pavilion would definitely not allow an emperor's sword lady to be kept as a collection by a sword bearer. This kind of important human weapon could only be kept in the hands of Sword Pavilion, and wait for the emperor's sword to awaken and begin to wander the world. The unknown emperor's sword in Guhan's hands had to be handed over to Sword Pavilion for safekeeping after Guhan returned to the base city, so it was not considered as Guhan's own. This was probably the reason why Yi Qing had not mentioned this emperor's sword from the beginning to the end. In her eyes, this emperor's sword did not belong to Guhan, so she would not tell Guhan any detailed information about this emperor's sword. In fact, she did not care about this emperor's sword at all. No. Yi Qing should be most concerned about this emperor's sword. Guhan's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but recall the process of discovering this emperor's sword. When Yi Qing's body completely melted, Guhan vaguely heard a clang. However, at that time, Guhan was immersed in his grief for Yi Qing, so he did not pay attention to the source of the sound. After thinking about it, he realized that the sword was on the sofa, and when Guhan picked up the melted Yi Qing, the sword was definitely not on the sofa. This sword should have appeared when Yi Qing's voice disappeared, and the clang was the sound of the sword falling on the sofa. This meant that the sword was very likely hidden in Yi Qing's body. In fact, Yi Qing's candy body was not as simple as a body, she was a container. Yi Qing's body was like amber, and her body was wrapped around the emperor's sword in Guhan's hand. Guhan even suspected that Zhetian Zhendi had created this candy Yi Qing's body to hide this emperor's sword. If one knew that emperor's swords were usually hidden in unknown, mysterious places, and only when the emperor's sword wanted to appear, would it appear in the human world. Awaken. Then, it would release a brilliant sword light. The emperor's sword was like a strong magnetic point that emitted strong electromagnetic waves, and it could attract the attention of all emperor swordwielders and emperor swordwielders at all times. Once this emperor's sword appeared, in Zhendi's eyes, it would be as dazzling as the sun in the sky, even if it was thousands of miles away. It was impossible for them not to discover the existence of this emperor's sword. In reality, Guhan seemed to be able to feel two untraceable and bright gazes from Yangjing City and London City. Their gazes were focused on the emperor's sword in Guhan's hand. Hence, if one wanted to hide this sword, they had to use special materials to seal it. This should be the reason for Candy Yi Qing's existence, which was to seal this sword, so that other Zhendi would not be able to find any trace of this sword. Guhan, do you have any clothes? Qingpin wants to change. It's so dirty. Jiyu Yun wants to change too, we want to wear the panda clothes. Qingpin and Jiyu Yun ran over hand in hand, interrupting Guhan's thoughts. Guhan lowered his head and saw that Qingpin and Jiyu Yun's bodies were black. A crocodile and a shark, which were originally green and blue, had turned black. It looked as if they had been soaked in black ink. Guhan, you can't blame us. We were playing happily with the rabbits and foxes in the bushes when they suddenly turned into black water and dirted our clothes. We really didn't roll around on the ground. Qingpin explained with an innocent face. If her body was not covered in mud, Guhan would definitely believe her. Of course, this was not the main point. As far as Guhan could see, the entire fairytale kingdom had begun to collapse. All the animals had disappeared, the originally green grass had become scorched black, and all the leaves on the trees had fallen, turning the place into a barren army. Even the artificial sun and stars in the sky had begun to flicker, as if the voltage was insufficient and could be extinguished at any time. This place is about to completely collapse, we have to leave. Yi Tian had also returned to Guhan's side. Her body was also soaked in black water. Could it be that she had also been playing with a rabbit in her arms? Alright, Ji Han didn't have the time to guess Yi Tian's maiden's heart. He looked at the collapsing scene around him with a sense of loss, then bowed his head and said, "Goodbye." He touched the green stone ring on his finger, then disappeared with the sword lady. Chapter 429. Blessed Curls. Has an hour passed? Reinhard, who was somewhat anxious, asked a small follower behind him. The little follower secretly rolled his eyes at Reinhard and thought to himself, "Can't you display the time on your personal terminal? Do you have to ask me so that you can show me that I'm your follower?" Unfortunately, he only silently complained in his heart, because he knew that Reinhard was a person that Long Shijendi valued very much. There were even rumors in London that Reinhard was Long Shijendi's illegitimate son, which was why he valued him so much. In short, he didn't dare to confront Reinhard face to face, so he could only glance at his own time, and then replied with a smile, "Boss, it's already 14:25, it's been 50 minutes since that kid entered the finish line." "Is that so? He's finally coming out." Reinhard raised his eyebrows, and secretly ordered blessed curls through his personal terminal. "You tell all the brothers to be on high alert, release the sword maidens, and listen to my command later, understand?" "Understood." Blessed curls nodded, but then he was puzzled. "Big brother, that kid is just a civilian. Is it necessary to let all the brothers be on high alert? With Big Brother here, isn't it a piece of cake? What do you know, that kid is not that easy to deal with." Reinhard glared at Blessed Curls. "That kid can defeat that Yuan Ku boss. His strength is probably the strongest among all the people present. Not to mention me alone, even if we go together, I'm afraid it will be somewhat dangerous. Moreover, that Liunian Ling and that kid are together. I'm afraid that the people of Yangjing City will help him. Do you think our brothers can beat this group of people from Yangjing City? As long as we work hard, and be a little hot-blooded." Originally, Blessed Curls wanted to say that as long as one was hot-blooded, nothing was impossible, but after thinking about it, his legs trembled when he thought of the Liunyan clan's billion sword skill. He was fortunate enough to see the billion sword skill. At that time, the sky was filled with tens of thousands of swords. That scene, he would never forget it for the rest of his life. "Forget it, I'm afraid that I won't have time to remind you when the time comes. Tell our brothers to be more alert. If the situation is not right, we will defend with all our might. Do you understand? Defense. Shouldn't everyone be attacking?" Blessed Curls suddenly didn't understand what Reinhard was trying to say. "You don't need to know. You just need to pass on the message." After saying that, Lionheart didn't say another word to Blessed Curls, because at this time, the entire trial hall began to shake, then a crack appeared in the space. Guhan took Qing Pin and Yi Tian and jumped down from this crack. "Boy, you're finally willing to come out." Seeing Guhan appear, Reinhard took the lead and jumped in front of Guhan. Then, he saw the golden sword in Guhan's hand and was stunned. "It's her. That's right, it's her. It's exactly the same as the picture His Majesty showed me. This is the Emperor's sword hidden here." Reinhard swallowed a mouthful of saliva, his whole body was excited. He, Reinhard, was actually lucky enough to see the Emperor's sword with his own eyes. Moreover, he was so close to the Emperor's sword. As long as he stretched out his hand, the Emperor's sword would be in his hand. Reinhard stretched out his hand on the spot, wanting to take the Emperor's sword in Guhan's hand. "Pa!" A loud sound was heard, and a long red and swollen mark appeared on Reinhard's face. This was because Yi Tian saw that Reinhard's pig hand was about to make a move, so she couldn't help but slap Reinhard's face with the blade of her sword. "You've got guts." Reinhard's face was swollen like a monkey's butt. It could be seen how powerful Yi Tian's slap was. It was so painful that Reinhard almost cried. "Phut, this heroine has even beaten Zetian Jendi. Do you think I'm afraid of an idiot like you? If you know what's good for you, then take back your pig trotters and get lost from this heroine's eyes." Yi Tian scolded him mercilessly. "You!" Reinhard's breath was stuck in his throat, and he almost couldn't spit it out. As the saying goes, don't expose a person's shortcomings, and don't hit a person's face in a fight. Reinhard had lived for so long, but he had never been hit in the face. This made Reinhard so angry that he wanted to fight with Guhan on the spot. However, there was one thing that Reinhard couldn't understand. How could Yi Tian break through his personal shield and hit his face? It should be known that Reinhard was already prepared. He was already holding the sword lady in his hand, and his personal shield had already been activated. Yi Tian's sword could only hit his personal shield, and it was impossible for it to hit his face. "Here, I'll return it to you. This sword is quite useful, and it feels great to use." At this time, Yi Tian handed the sword back to Guhan. Guhan didn't say anything. He just smiled and put the sword back into his dimensional pocket. However, in that instant, Lionheart was able to clearly see what Yi Tian had handed to Ji Yu Han. It turned out that what Yi Tian had used to hit him wasn't her heavenly sword at all, but a toy sword made of wood. Because it was a toy sword, it was impossible for it to be imbued with something like sword essence. Therefore, the sword didn't trigger the personal shield's automatic protection function, and it directly hit Reinhard's face. Damn it! Reinhard continuously gritted his teeth, surnamed Ji Yu. Is this how you restrain your sword lady? I didn't do anything, but your sword lady indiscriminately attacked her comrade. In your eyes, do you still have the law of a sword wielder? Do you even have the slightest bit of comradeship? Hehe, this Reinhard was quite good at talking. He directly put a hat on Ji Yu Han's head that disregarded the law and the comradeship of his comrades. Don't look down on this hat. If this hat was really worn, Guhan would suffer. Because what Reinhard said was the truth. Although Reinhard didn't ask for Guhan's opinion and wanted to touch Guhan's emperor's sword, which was a very taboo thing to do, it wasn't to the extent that Guhan could hurt him. At most, Guhan could only explicitly reject Reinhard. This was like asking someone to borrow money, but not only did the other party refuse to lend it to you, but he also directly beat you up. Although the one who did it was Guhan's sword lady and not Guhan himself, the sword lady and the sword wielder were on the same side. If the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party carefully examined the law and decided to sentence him, not to mention anything else, he would be sent to jail for around 2 years. Hearing Reinhard's words, Guhan didn't reply. His expression didn't change either, and he maintained a look of silence. Guhan's original intention was to disdain talking to Reinhard, but Reinhard mistakenly thought that Guhan was afraid. He immediately sneered, "Brat, give me the sword in your hand and I'll forget about this matter. I won't go to the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party to complain about you. How about it? This is a very good deal. You won't be able to use that sword for the rest of your life, so why not give it to me and save yourself a few years in the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party's prison?" Reinhard's threatening posture towards Guhan was extremely ugly, and the sword wielder from the other cities couldn't stand it anymore. The way Reinhard was drooling over the sword in Guhan's hand was clearly telling them that the sword was the most precious treasure in the trial formation, an emperor sword lady. Miss Ling, the emperor sword can't be taken by the people of London City. When I came, Hao Tianzhendi sent me a message, telling us to do our best to bring this emperor sword back to Yuzhong City. We must get that sword before Reinhard does. Once the sword is in Reinhard's hands, it will be very difficult for us to get it back. A Yangjing City sword wielder moved closer to Liuyan Ling and whispered into her ear. It seemed that Yangjing City was also determined to get this emperor sword. This was very normal. The other cities were also drooling over the emperor sword in Guhan's hands, wishing that they could have it in their own hands. However, they didn't have the emperor sword behind them, so they had to be cautious at this time. If they didn't force out the trump card in Reinhard's hands, no one was willing to stand out. No need, that sword is the safest in Guhan's hands. If Reinhard wants to snatch something from his hands, he won't be able to without paying a sufficient price. At that time, it won't be too late for us to make a move, Liuyan Ling said lightly. Even a fool could guess that Reinhard was so arrogant because Long Shijendi had given him something. Now it was up to Guhan to deal with this difficult problem. Before Guhan was in danger, Liuyan Ling didn't intend to make a move. "TSK, you fat pig, shut up for this heroine. This heroine will take responsibility for this matter alone. The person who hit you is me. If you have the guts, let your sword lady fight with me." In the face of Reinhard's coercion, Yi Tian spat on the ground and took all the responsibility on herself. "Yi Tian." Guhan sighed and said, "You used too little strength just now. It's best to slap his mouth until he can no longer speak. That way, you don't have to listen to a wild boar's crazy barking here." Ji Yu Han. Yi Tian turned around and saw Ji Yu Han's face filled with gentleness. Yi Tian imagined it, as she said to him. "Good, good, good." Reinhard said good 3 times with a ferocious expression. He then turned to look at Liuyan Ling behind him. "Miss Liuyan Ling, I, Reinhard, request a duel with this person. This matter concerns the dignity of the City of London. You have no right to refuse. As mentioned before, the Liu Nian family had the right to arbitrate. This right naturally included the right to arbitrate whether a duel could be carried out. Generally speaking, when two sword-bearers had an unavoidable conflict in the wild, they would have the right to start a duel. There were many factors that would determine whether a duel was necessary. The dignity of the sword-bearers was one of the most important factors. Reinhard had just been slapped in the face and insulted by Gu Han. This was completely in line with the conditions for a duel. At this time, as long as Liuyan Ling nodded, the duel could start. Mr. Gu Han, do you agree to Mr. Reinhard's request for a duel? Since this duel was reasonable, Liuyan Ling could only confirm the matter with Gu Han. Sure, I have no objections, Gu Han said calmly. Chapter 430. At this moment, the middle of the hall was empty. Only Reinhard, Liuyan Ling, and Gu Han were standing in the middle of the hall. This empty space was naturally prepared for the duel between Gu Han and Reinhard. May I ask Mr. Reinhard, have you decided to start a duel with Mr. Gu Han that concerns your dignity, and that you will completely submit to the result of the duel? Liuyan Ling, who was standing between Gu Han and Reinhard, asked Reinhard. This was a necessary step before the duel. They had to confirm the legality of the entire duel and the various conditions of the duel. The host of the duel would record the entire process and send it to the base city for archiving. This was to prevent anyone from going back on their word. I confirm. Reinhard touched his red and swollen face and said while gritting his teeth. Then, Mr. Gu Han, do you also agree to this duel and completely submit to the result of the duel? Liuyan Ling confirmed with Gu Han. Gu Han naturally agreed. Very well. Then, as for the rules of the duel, which duel rule do you two wish to use among the 7 duel rules? Liuyan Ling said again. The so-called duel rules, as the name suggested, referred to the various restrictions of the duel. The lowest level duel rule was the first level duel rule, which was the most restrictive. This duel rule only allowed the two sword-bearers to use a sword maiden of the same level to fight. If the depth of the sword mark was different, then the depth of the sword mark must be limited to the level of the lower sword maiden. Apart from the sword maiden itself, no other props were allowed. They were not allowed to damage the durability of the sword maiden, and they were not allowed to attack the sword bearer. In short, this first level duel rule was the most restrictive and restrictive rule. I choose the 7th level duel rule. I don't know if Mr. Gu Han has the guts to agree, Reinhard said with a sneer. The 7th level duel rule was on the other end of the spectrum compared to the first level duel rule. Apart from not breaking the sword maiden and not harming the sword bearer's life, there were no other restrictions. If Reinhard was willing, he could even cut off Gu Han's hands and feet, then humiliate Gu Han in all sorts of ways. In the end, he just had to throw Gu Han into the medical pod to ensure that he wouldn't die. The 7th level duel rule was definitely a very cruel duel rule. In the entire human world, very few people would use the 7th level duel rule. Usually, duels started for the sake of dignity would choose the 5th level duel rule, which was to protect the opponent's body. The 7th level duel rule, which was cruel and absolute, would only be brought up when it involved the hatred of life. Of course, the 7th level duel rule was proposed by Reinhard alone. Gu Han could completely reject this rule and negotiate later. I'm fine with it. Gu Han didn't reject it and directly agreed to Reinhard's request. What a joke. Since the other party wanted to court death, there was no reason for Gu Han not to welcome him warmly. Gu Han was the real master of the green onion stone trial formation. As long as Gu Han thought about it, hundreds of memory fragments would run over to help Gu Han beat people up. Why would Gu Han be afraid of Reinhard? Ha 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 ha, you've got guts. If you weren't holding that sword in your hand, then I, Reinhard, might even be willing to be friends with you. Reinhard laughed out loud when he heard Jiu Han's promise. From Reinhard's point of view, when Gu Han agreed to the 7th level duel rule, the victory of this duel was already in Reinhard's hands. Then the last question. Liuyan Ling clapped her hands. As a duel, there must be rewards and punishments for the duel. May I ask what are the rewards and punishments for the duel? I want him to hand over the sword in his hand to me, then kneel on the ground and apologize for insulting the city of London. Reinhard said first. What about you, Mr. Guhan? Liu Ling turned to ask Guhan. In the end, Guhan didn't say a word for a long time because Guhan didn't know what he wanted from Reinhard. Guhan wasn't interested in making Reinhard kneel and apologize to him. It didn't have any practical meaning. Guhan didn't know what Reinhard had that was worth coveting. At this time, Yi Qing had given him 20 sword mark engravings, which made Guhan a tycoon. Guhan didn't care about what Reinhard had. Tell me, what do you want? Seeing that Guhan didn't speak for a long time, Reinhard became anxious. He thought that Guhan had gone back on his words and didn't want to duel with him. If that was the case, Reinhard would have to take action by force and snatch the Emperor's sword from Guhan's hands. Although this was similar to a duel where he would have to fight with Guhan, Reinhard's reputation would probably become unbearably bad in the eyes of the other swordbearers if he snatched it without any reason. In fact, most of this duel was deliberately led by Reinhard in order to reasonably and legally snatch the Emperor's sword from Guhan's hands. Although Longsha Jendi had taken the blame for him, Reinhard still didn't want to ruin his reputation if he could. How about this? If I, Reinhard, lose, I will hand this person over to you. You can do whatever you want to me. You can do whatever you want to me. What do you think? In order to let the duel go smoothly, Reinhard took the initiative to put forward such a proposal. Guhan definitely had no interest in Reinhard, but his words made Guhan's mind light up. Perhaps this Reinhard really has his own use. My request is that if I win, then Reinhard will be mine. Guhan finally gave his promise. Very good. Then, Mr. Guhan, Mr. Reinhard, do you have any objections to your rewards and punishments? Liu Ling finally confirmed. No objections. No objections. Then I announce that under the witness of the 29th generation successor of the Liuyan clan, Liu Ling, Mr. Guhan from Yuzhong City and Mr. Reinhard from London will have a fair duel established under the Level 7 duel rules. In this duel, both sides can use any swordplay, any weapon, any tool, any tactic, any strategy to cause damage to any part of the opponent as long as they don't break the opponent's swordplay or kill the opponent. This duel will continue until one side loses the ability to fight or surrenders. If Reinhard is the winner, he will receive the golden swordplay from Guhan and a kneeling apology. If Guhan is the winner, he will receive the right to use Reinhard's body. After Liu Ling finished her speech, Reinhard quickly entered his battle state because the duel had already begun. Sacred, glory, death, vermilion, Aaron, incest. The falling, fallen, blessing, protection. Suddenly, Lionheart's style changed. He stuck the huge sword in his hand into the ground and started to chant strange English words loudly and clearly. Although Reinhard was a Londoner, 95% of the English people had probably forgotten how to speak English in this era where Mandarin was the king. Only the most ancient English aristocratic families still mastered this traditional English language. It seemed like Reinhard was already very familiar with these words. When he chanted them, it made people's blood boil. It would be a pity if he didn't become a voice actor in a hot-blooded anime. Speaking of which, it had been a long time since Ji Han had heard such a Chunibya explanation. Generally speaking, only the Chunibya youths in the game would like to say such shameful Chunibya explanations when they liberated the sword lady. In real life, the wielder of a sword would never do such a thing. This wasn't because of face, but because the song was not only long, but also had to be accompanied by a rhythmic tone and movements. It might even take more than 10 seconds to chant. If there was so much time, Yuan Ku would have already rushed to the side of the sword wielder and killed him. Therefore, sword wielders in real life wouldn't bother with things like song interpretation. He didn't expect Reinhard to like this kind of thing. Fortunately, this was a duel. Ordinary people wouldn't take advantage of this time to attack. Otherwise, Reinhard would have been lying on the ground. Unfortunately, Guhan wasn't an ordinary person. Most importantly, he couldn't stand someone chanting such a Chunibya song in front of him, and he could only watch like an idiot. Therefore, when Reinhard chanted the fourth word, the heavenly sword moved. The heavenly sword was already in a liberated state. Ji Han had even skipped the step of liberating the sword lady. The heavenly sword's figure flashed, and in less than 2 seconds, it appeared in front of Reinhard. It raised its heavenly sword and was about to slash at Reinhard's head. What a fast speed! Everyone who saw this scene narrowed their eyes. At this moment, the distance between Ji Han and Reinhard should be the official standard for a duel between sword-bearers of the sword tier, which was 100 meters. However, the heaven-reliant sword had actually used only 2 seconds to reach Reinhard. This speed was practically like that of a ghost. My dear brother, did I remember wrong? Didn't they say that the maximum speed of a sword wielder is 20 meters per second? How can this swordplay be so fast? Mylan, one of the leaders of the Buenos Aires army, asked her brother in a panic. This speed was too terrifying for a sword maiden of the treasure sword rank. My dear sister, I don't know either. Messi said bitterly, but this Yuzhang man's sword maiden is the heaven-relieving sword. The heaven-relieving sword is comparable to the top-ranking sword maidens. If the heaven-relieving sword is improved to the 1st grade, it's not impossible for him to reach his current speed. It's deepened to the 1st grade. Mylan didn't know if she should open her mouth or close it. As the leader of the Buenos Aires army, her sword wielder was only deepened to the 3rd grade. Mylan really couldn't afford the rest of the sword marks. Brother, can you defeat him? Can we defeat him together? Mylan originally wanted to ask if her brother could defeat Gu Han. Perhaps she felt that it was impossible, so she changed her question to whether the two of them could defeat Gu Han together. Be reasonable, my dear sister, Messi said very seriously. We should be friends with him. Why must we be enemies? A great man from the East once said, politics is to make more friends for yourself and fewer friends for your enemies. I think this is the most correct principle in the world. Chapter 431. Oh my God! What happened to Heavenly Sword in the past 10 days? Heavenly Sword is now 3 times faster than when it was fighting Ashima. Liu Ling couldn't help but exclaim in admiration when she saw Heavenly Sword's speed. She was the person who understood Gu Han's combat strength the most. She had watched the entire battle with Ashima and found that Heavenly Sword's speed had increased by 3 times. No wonder Heavenly Sword is so strong after a month. So this is the reason. The other person who was familiar with Gu Han's combat strength was Ashima. As Gu Han's direct opponent, she felt that Heavenly Sword was even stronger than Liu Ling previously. She couldn't understand how Yi Tian could become so strong after a month. Now that she saw Yi Tian's terrifying movement speed, she understood. It seemed like this improvement had happened in a short span of 10 days. Could it be that Ji Han has already reached the level of a famed sword wielder in the past 10 days? That's impossible. There's no way to increase sword essence in this trial formation. At first, Ashima suspected that Gu Han had become a famed swordsman in the past 10 days. However, it was impossible to replenish sword essence in this trial formation. There was no real Yuan coup here. Of course, Gu Han hadn't reached the level of a famed swordsman. In fact, apart from synchronizing with the Duyu sword and gaining 1,000 quarks of sword essence, Gu Han hadn't gained a single quark of sword essence. Currently, he had around 4,000 sword essence in his body. Heavenly Sword hadn't reached the level of a grade 1 famed swordsman either. Although Yi Qing had given Gu Han enough sword essence to reach the level of a grade 1 sword essence, it would take a lot of time. Gu Han had returned directly after leaving Fairytale Valley, so where would he have the time to give Heavenly Sword essence? The real reason why Heavenly Sword's strength had changed so much was naturally because of the yin-yang swordsmanship technique. Even though Gu Han's Duyu sword was hidden in his dimensional pocket, the attribute enhancement from the two still existed on Gu Han and Heavenly Sword. For the Sword Maiden, the sum of 2 wasn't as simple as 2. In reality, the combat power displayed was almost 3 times that of the original. Even the spectating sword-bearers felt their hearts palpitate at the terrifying power of 3 times their strength. What about Lionheart, who was being attacked by the Heavenly Sword? This person was completely dumbfounded. When the Heavenly Sword attacked, Reinhard was still thinking of using this opportunity to finish chanting the sword scripture. In any case, it would take at least 7 or 8 seconds. However, Reinhard immediately regretted it. In the blink of an eye, the heavenly sword was already in front of him. Reinhard was not an idiot, and he did not have the habit of wasting his time. He decisively gave up on chanting the sword hymn and immediately poured the sword essence into the greatsword in his hand. With a flash of red light, a sword lady dressed in blood-red armor appeared beside Reinhard. Unfortunately, the sword lady appeared too late. She had only just opened her eyes to take a good look at her surroundings when the heavenly sword's blade had already arrived beside Reinhard. Then, it stabbed into Reinhard's head. Reinhard could only feel his head buzzing as if there were countless flies flying around. The entire world became dark and trembled. Reinhard knew that he had been attacked in an important part of his body, such as his temple, heart, and so on. These parts of his body had relatively weak shields. Once he was attacked, he would feel great discomfort. Red Hilt, help me stop her. I need time. The moment he was sent flying, Reinhard used the last of his strength to order his Red Hilt to protect him. Red Hilt was the sword of Galahad, one of the 12 Knights of the Round Table under King Arthur's command. It belonged to the 12 Knights of the Round Table series of sword maidens, who all wore medieval knight armor. Red Hilt's armor was rather unique. It was different from the other Knights of the Round Table, which focused on defense. Red Hilt's armor seemed lighter and thinner, as if it was a defective product that had been skimped on. Many parts of her body were exposed. Only the armor on her back was extremely thick. Just by looking at it, one could tell that this part of the armor had terrifying defensive power. Red Hilt's main body, Red Hilt, had a unique appearance. Rather than a sword, it was better to call it a large cross. It was inlaid with all kinds of gems and emitted a dazzling light. Yes, my dear friend. Red Hilt's eyes flashed with a blood-red light. She then stood in front of Reinhard and held the cross in front of her. Stop, sister. If you dare to take one more step towards my dear friend, you will have to bear the endless attacks of Red Hilt. Who the hell are you? Get out of my way. I don't know you. Heavenly Sword glanced at Red Hilt casually and was about to continue looking for trouble with Reinhard, who was lying on the ground recovering. Naturally, Red Hilt wouldn't let Heavenly Sword pass. She firmly blocked Heavenly Sword's path. Chimph, a mere red-furred sword dares to compete with me, how you are? Yi Tian swung his sword horizontally and slashed towards Red Hilt. Yi Tian did not increase his sword speed, he just calmly slashed forward. In front of my Red Hilt holy light, all evil will turn into sheep. Red Hilt muttered. The many gems on Red Hilt's sword began to emit laser-like rays of light towards Heavenly Sword in front of her. What kind of light is this? Heavenly Sword instantly stopped when it saw the light shining on its body. It was as if its pressure points had been poked. Hmph, arrogant fool. How can you be a match for me, Red Hilt? On the other hand, seeing that Heavenly Sword had stopped, Red Hilt revealed a satisfied smile. The light just now was her basic skill, Petrify Curse. It could petrify an opponent for a whole 10 seconds. Moreover, this curse would definitely succeed against an opponent of the same level. Let me end you now with my Rock Crush. The hilt of the Red Hilt flashed with a crimson light, and then the two guards separated from the hilt. In an instant, they shot towards the petrified Sky Reliance like arrows from a bow. This was Red Hilt's advanced skill, Rock Crush. It could separate the two handguards from the sword hilt and launch a powerful attack. The strength of this attack was that it had a chance of triggering the Rock Crush effect. When her opponent was petrified, they would receive 1000% damage. This was already enough to instantly kill many Yuan Ku of the same level. As such, Red Hilt was filled with confidence. She felt that this annoying Dongfang sword lady would definitely not be a match for her. If she knew that her opponent was actually Heavenly Sword, and a Heavenly Sword that had been strengthened by 3 times, she would definitely not think this way. What the hell is this? Heavenly Sword, who was originally petrified, suddenly swung the Heavenly Sword in her hand. The two handguards that had shot out were sent flying hundreds of meters away. The speed at which they were sent flying was even faster than the speed at which they were flying towards Heavenly Sword. What a powerful opponent! Heaven's Stairway. Only now did Red Hilt realize how powerful her opponent was. The petrifying combo that had never failed in the past had actually failed. Red Hilt panicked, and immediately prepared to use her ultimate skill, Heaven's Stairway. Heaven's Stairway was Red Hilt's ultimate skill. It actually projected an extremely long illusory stairway in the sky that seemed to reach the clouds. Once the stairway was formed, she would be able to 100% lock onto her opponent and bring them to Heaven's Stairway. How was it? Didn't it sound like it was going to explode the heavens? Heavens, has Red Hilt been forced out of Heaven's Stairway? Looks like Red Hilt is going to go all out. Stop looking. Heaven's Stairway has already appeared. This sword lady is going to lose for sure. The London sword bearers all discussed amongst themselves. They felt that Guhan was about to lose. This was because their impression of Heaven's Stairway was just too deep. Lionheart had relied on this move to sweep through London. The effect of Heaven's Stairway was indeed very powerful. By consuming the energy of her personal shield, she could directly deal true damage equivalent to the energy of her personal shield to her opponent. It was equivalent to using Red Hilt's personal shield energy to exchange for the opponent's personal shield energy. After Lionheart became a sword-level swordsman, he relied on his family's power and spent a lot of money to upgrade the Red Hilt sword to Grade 1, awakening the Red Hilt sword's ultimate skill. He was the only one of a kind among all the young sword-level swordsmen in London. In addition, Red Hilt had reached level 1. In terms of defense, none of the young sword-rank sword-bearers in London could surpass Red Hilt in defense. Therefore, Red Hilt's ultimate skill became a legend in London. No sword lady could resist Red Hilt's ultimate skill. This was also the reason why Lionheart was unbeatable in London. It was because his sword Scar Profound was too high level, and his ultimate skill was too overpowered. However, it was a pity that Red Hilt had picked the wrong opponent this time. She shouldn't have picked on Heavenly Sword. Yi Tian's lips curled up into a disdainful smile as he looked at the flight of stairs that was gradually extending to his feet. The Heavenly Sword in his hand trembled a little and left an afterimage on the stairs. In an instant, the sword burst like a soap bubble. My kingdom of Heaven's Stairway has been slashed apart. Red Hilt Sword was terrified. To be able to destroy his ultimate move with one slash meant that the opponent's swordsmanship had reached an extremely shocking level, able to tear apart the entire space at an extremely fast speed. Only then could it be possible to destroy the illusion of his kingdom of Heaven's Stairway. Red Hilt had no way of resisting such power. In reality, Red Hilt did not resist at all. Although Red Hilt was a knight's equipment, she relied on her skills like a mage. She did not have much knowledge in swordsmanship, and was probably no better than King Yu, who had forgotten his own swordsmanship. Thus, when all of her skills were nullified, Hong Hilt's sword could only wait for death. The heaven-reliant sword slashed down on her chest, sending her flying. As she flew through the air, her body disappeared and she reverted back to a sword covered in cracks. Because Red Hilt had used up all of her shield's energy to use the Heaven's Stairway, her personal shield had already disappeared when Heavenly Sword struck her, and Heavenly Sword's attack had directly hit her body. If Heavenly Sword hadn't discovered that her personal shield had disappeared, and was scared into withdrawing part of her sword essence, Red Hilt would have been slashed in half. However, even though Heavenly Sword had withdrawn its power, Red Hilt was still heavily injured. Looking at the cracks on her blade, around 50% of her durability had been lost. You're next. Stay there and don't move. Let me slap the other side of your face until it's swollen, and I'll allow you to surrender. Heavenly Sword chuckled, looking extremely arrogant. Lionheart did not notice that he had secretly taken out a small item from his dimensional pocket after recovering his consciousness during the precious battle. Chapter 432. Reinhard, do you know why we are going to Chongyang Mountain this time? In a huge living room, Long Shijendi was sitting on the sofa, watching the variety show run, sword-bearer in front of him very seriously. Behind him, Reinhard was standing there respectfully. It is to rescue Miss Liuanian Ling, and to obtain the sword lady of the Emperor sword level. Reinhard replied. It seems that you are very clear about your mission. This is very good. Then let me ask you again, do you have the confidence to rely on your own ability to get that Emperor sword from the other 7 base cities? Long Shijendi asked. Yes. Reinhard gritted his teeth and thought for a long time. He felt that he could not lose his momentum in front of Long Shijendi, so he spat out the word yes. You have a fart. A cup of hot tea flew towards Reinhard's face. Normal people would instinctively avoid him when they saw this situation. However, Reinhard did not dare to move. He stood straight and let the teacup hit his face. The hot tea poured on his skin, burning red spots one after another. Reinhard's face looked as if he had red measles. Reinhard, you are just a piece of trash. Even if you rely on your red hilt sword to obtain the achievement of the best sword level person, you are still a piece of trash. Long Shijendi's words were like a basin of cold water, completely dousing the heart of Reinhard, who was originally excited because of seeing Long Shijendi. I will only let you go, Reinhard, because there is no one among the sword bearers of the sword level. Remember, you must bring that sword back to me this time. Even if you face the siege of the 7 cities, you must bring the Emperor's sword back to London. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Reinhard will bring back the Emperor's sword even if he has to risk his life. Reinhard knelt behind Long Shijendi and deeply buried his originally arrogant head. Life. Those people will not want your life, and your life is not worth much. Not to mention the 7 cities, you can't be a match for Lionian Ling alone. Long Shijendi threw a small gourd in front of Reinhard. Take her with you. Once that Emperor sword appears, crush this gourd. You don't have to worry about the rest. After speaking, Long Shijendi waved his hand. His butler came to Reinhard's side and took him away from Long Shijendi's imperial palace. I thought that only Lionian Ling could suppress me, so I planned to use this thing when facing Lionian Ling. I didn't expect that such a monster would appear in Yuzhang City. It's really ridiculous. Reinhard smiled bitterly in his heart. Although he didn't want to use this item bestowed by Long Shijendi on Guhan, seeing that the red hilt sword that he was so proud of had been defeated by the heavenly sword without even using its big move, Reinhard knew that it was impossible for him to defeat Guhan. He could only use Long Shijendi's trump card. Please, Your Highness Durandal. Reinhard knelt on the ground and hurriedly crushed the small gourd given to him by Long Shijendi before Heavenly Sword could attack him. This is the power of an immortal sword. As Reinhard crushed the small gourd in his hand, Heavenly Sword, who was already in front of Reinhard, had goosebumps all over her body. She could feel the unique power of an immortal sword maiden from Reinhard's small gourd. Knock Reinhard out first. As long as he faints, we'll win. Heavenly Sword's face was as calm as water, but she remained calm at this critical juncture. She knew that the way to victory was not to defeat Reinhard's immortal sword maiden, but to defeat Reinhard himself. As long as she could knock Reinhard out in time, even if Reinhard summoned the Emperor Sword Maiden, victory would still belong to Heavenly Sword Maiden. Therefore, Heavenly Sword did not care about what would come out of Reinhard's gourd. Instead, she struck Reinhard's temple with all her might. As long as Reinhard fainted, everything would be settled. However, Heavenly Sword was still a step too slow. The immortal sword maiden in the gourd had finally woken up. With a clang, Heavenly Sword was blocked by a sword. Then, that sword was pushed back slightly. Heavenly Sword was like a soccer ball that had been kicked away. It flew over 100 meters towards Guhan's position and landed right in front of Guhan. That's right. This is the power of an immortal sword. What a detestable power. Heavenly Sword spat on the ground. Just one strike had caused her personal shield to lose around half of its energy. No, this is not the power of an immortal sword. This formation does not allow immortal sword maidens to enter. The thing that Yi Qing left behind doesn't have such a big loophole. Guhan patted Heavenly Sword's body and smoothed out the creases in her clothes. However, his eyes were fixed on the immortal sword maiden in front of Reinhard. Just like the red hilt sword, this immortal sword maiden was also dressed like a knight. Her pitch-black armor reflected the specks of light, like the starry sky in the night sky. This immortal sword maiden had a grave and stern expression. Her body was straight and firm like a poplar in the desert. His legs were not tight, there was not even a sliver of gap. The knight's armor was also polished and shiny. It was worn in the most correct position without the slightest bit of crookedness. Her sword and her legs were slightly slanted. If one used an angle ruler to measure it, one would find that the sword and her legs formed a 15-degree angle. Everyone who saw this immortal sword maiden for the first time would involuntarily have the same thought: this is a real knight. Although many immortal sword maidens used the posture of a knight as their first form, only this immortal sword maiden in front of them had the perfect appearance of a knight. She was the role model for countless knights. She was known as the number one holy knight. She was one of the 3 holy swords of Europe, Durandal. It's you, Durandal. Long time no see. Yi Tian seemed to be very familiar with her opponent. In a flash, she appeared in front of Durandal and looked at her with a smile. Yes, long time no see, Lady Yi Tian. Durandal nodded slightly at Yi Tian. It was another extremely standard knight's bow that could be measured with a ruler. After 700 years, Lady Yi Tian is still as elegant as ever. You too, Durandal. 700 years have passed, yet you haven't changed at all. You're still the same old fogey. Yi Tian's words contained a hint of ridicule. If the way of knights cannot be followed, then there is no value in the existence of knights. Durandal's expression was always solemn. There had never been any change in her expression. Durandal was one of the most famous immortal sword maidens. She was the most memorable immortal sword maiden. She was different from the lazy heavenly sword maidens who had only appeared 3 times in 1,000 years. Durandal could be said to be a model sword maiden. She was known as the sword maiden who never slept. In these 1,000 years, she had slept for less than 10 years. She had a total of 21 sword bearers, and the average time she slept was only half a year. She could be said to be the most hard-working sword mistress who had sacrificed the most for humanity. Durandal had experienced 15 sword immortals and 6 Gendi swords. She had participated in almost all of humanity's major battles in the past 1,000 years. She had fought in more than 17,000 battles for humanity. She had killed more than 5 million Yuan Ku swords, been heavily injured more than 30 times, and almost broken 5 times. All of these achievements had caused every human to have an extremely respectful attitude towards Durandal. There had never been a sword maiden who had fought for humanity to this extent. If you don't believe me, you can look at the other sword maidens, including Guhan and Liunian Ling. All of the sword-tier sword maidens were kneeling on one knee, paying their utmost respect to Durandal with the etiquette of a knight. This was an honor that only Emperor sword maidens could receive. This represented the humans' recognition of Durandal. Hey, I haven't seen you for 700 years, and you've already received this kind of treatment. Seeing all the sword-bearers kneeling down in respect to Durandal, especially Ji Yu Han kneeling down, Yi Tian's heart began to ache. Your subject fights as a knight, so naturally, I should receive the etiquette of a knight. This is the glory of a knight, and also the meaning of your subject's existence. When Durandal said this, there was not a trace of change in her tone or expression. However, Yi Tian could still hear a hint of pride in the other party's tone. Only a fool would be like you, never knowing to rest and running out every day to fight with your life on the line. As Yi Tian spoke, she suddenly thought of something. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, revealing a naughty smile. Let's go. You should also rest for a while. Come and drink with me. Do you still remember the last time you drank with me? You were simply too cute at that time. Durandal seemed to recall some very bad memories, and a rare blush appeared on her face. She then quickly raised her sword to her chest and chanted to the heavenly sword. Yi Tian, this subject has been ordered by Longsha Gendi to bring the Emperor's sword back to London and protect the safety of the Emperor's sword. Please step aside, otherwise, you will become this subject's opponent. Durandal did not forget the reason why she came here. She came here to take away the Emperor's sword. That belongs to my sword-bearer, who was also chosen by Yi Qing. Durandal, give me some face, give Yi Qing some face, and don't get involved in today's matter. Yi Tian said quickly. From the looks of it, Durandal and Zhe Tian Gendi had a close friendship. Yi Tian, this subject is a knight. A knight must be loyal to their king and his majesty. His Majesty Zhe Tian's future is already in the past. Right now, this subject's majesty Longsha is this subject's majesty. Please step aside, otherwise, Don't blame this subject for fighting you with the etiquette of a knight, Durandar said without thinking. Yi Tian's attempt to gain favor failed. Yi Tian, come back, this is my fight. On the other side, Guhan took Yi Tian back into his hand and turned it back into its original form. This battle was unavoidable. Chapter 433. Very good, very good. Seeing Guhan holding the heavenly sword and facing him, Durandal's eyes revealed a hint of praise. Facing a strong opponent, you can bravely raise your sword, Maiden. Just this point alone shows that you are a very good seedling. Perhaps in the future, you will be able to shoulder the burden of the human race and become a brave knight, Durandal said expectantly. This expectation was not mixed with any impurities. It was an expectation of Guhan's courage. This showed that Durandal was indeed a true knight who took the life and death of the human race as his own responsibility. Many thanks for Sir Paladin's praise. Ji Han bowed to express his gratitude. Paladin was the honorific that the humans had for Durandar. Although there were countless Yuaniing who called themselves paladins in the camp, but among the humans, there was only one true paladin, and that was Durandar. You are a human with potential, and this subject does not wish to cause too much harm to you. Now, hand over the Emperor sword in your hand to this subject, and this matter will end here. This subject swears in the name of a knight that this subject Durandal owes you a favor. Heavens, Sir Paladin is actually using a favor to exchange with him. One of the onlookers exclaimed. That's right, Sir Paladin is truly a noble and respectable knight. It is clearly something easily obtainable, but he still chose to make a fair exchange. This is truly a great sword, Maiden. This Guhan really struck it big this time. He actually obtained a favor from Durandal. Isn't he afraid of nothing now? All of the onlookers spoke one after another. From their conversations, it was clear that they were already standing on Durandal's side. Durandal was clearly using the identity of an immortal sword maiden to bully a treasure sword grade swordsman. However, it must be admitted that Durandal's favor was indeed something precious. This was not a favor that ordinary people spoke of. As long as this favor was not harmful, did not violate justice, and did not involve the interests of the human race. Even if this favor was beyond the scope of Durandal's ability, Durandal would still repay this favor at all costs. To be honest, compared to handing over the Emperor's sword to the Sword Pavilion for safekeeping after returning to Yuzhang, getting Duranda's favor was actually more cost-effective. If he was really smart, he would have agreed to Duranda's request. Unfortunately, such a favor was not what Guhan wanted at all. Therefore, Guhan shook his head firmly and said, Lord Paladin, I have already reached an agreement with the person behind you. As long as you defeat me, you can obtain this Emperor's sword. Apart from that, there is no other way. Good, very good. Seeing Guhan's attitude, Durandal couldn't help but nod her head repeatedly. She was starting to like this straightforward young man who wasn't intimidated by difficulties and wasn't confused by benefits. If only this person was a Londoner, she would definitely pull Guhan into her holy light knights. Since you have chosen to fight, then this subject will go all out to bestow upon you the glory of a knight. The so-called glory of an all-out knight meant that Durandar would go all out in this upcoming battle. She would use her strongest strength to give Ji Han a glorious defeat that would be worthy of bragging. That's right, whether it was a human or a sword mistress, to be defeated by Durandar's all-out attack was undoubtedly something to be proud of. This shows that Durandar has fully recognized your strength. She views you as an opponent who can stand on equal footing with her. What a great glory! Hearing Durandal's words, the surrounding onlookers revealed even more envious and jealous looks. Being able to lose to Sir Durandal's full-strength attack, this human could be said to be completely famous. Durandal had never used his full strength against a sword-grade sword wielder before. This was really too lucky. Unfortunately, at this time, Guhan didn't feel that he was lucky at all. In fact, he was even regretting that he was too arrogant. If he had shown a little bit of fear just now, Durandar might not have gone all out. If that was the case, his chances of winning would have been even higher. That's right, even if he was facing an immortal sword-bearer, Guhan still felt that he had a chance of winning. because the Durandar in front of him was not the real Durandar, but just a projection formed by borrowing Longsha Gendi's power. This was a unique method of Gendi. He could use his own power to form a power seed, and then let this power seed establish a connection with one of his sword mistresses. A power seed like this was also called a sword mistress clone. This sword mistress clone could be stored in a specific container. Once the container was crushed, the sword mistress clone would instantly transform into the appearance of the sword mistress who had established a connection with the power seed, forming something similar to a clone. Producing such a power seed consumed a lot of Gendi's power. Even Gendi could only produce one power seed in half a year. Moreover, Gendi couldn't use it himself and could only hand it over to others. Generally speaking, sword emperors would give this kind of seed to their closest people to protect their safety in times of danger or to carry out some kind of special task. For example, right now, it was used to snatch the empress sword from Jiyu Han's hands. From this, it could be seen that Longsha Gendi had invested a lot in this. Longsha Gendi had become Gendi for less than 5 years, and the number of sword mistress clones in his hands was less than 10. Using one of them on Guhan, it could be said that he had invested a lot. However, it was precisely because this was a sword mistress clone that Guhan felt that he still had a chance to defeat her. As a clone, its power naturally couldn't be as terrifying as the main body. Generally speaking, a sword mistress clone only had about 1/3 of the main body's power, 1/3 of the power of an immortal sword rank sword mistress. In this way, Durandal's power had been reduced from the peak of immortal sword rank to the level of an ordinary immortal sword rank. After mastering the green onion stone, Guhan had a clear understanding of the entire trial formation. This trial formation limited the strength of a treasured sword wielder to the level of a treasured sword wielder. However, Durandar, who was an immortal sword wielder, had entered. This was a serious violation of the rules set by the heaven-shrouding sword emperor. As one of the strongest Gendi in history, Zetian Gendi had set up a spirit formation with all his might. Even if the main body of an immortal sword rank sword mistress came, she wouldn't be able to gain any advantage, let alone this was just a sword mistress clone. Therefore, under Guhan's control, all the power of the entire trial formation was concentrated here and began to suppress Durandal. This is the power of Zetian Gendi. Durandal, who was standing opposite Guhan, suddenly frowned. She felt a suffocating power pressing down on every inch of her body. As a sword mistress who had fought continuously for 1,000 years, Durandal had ample experience in all kinds of situations. She immediately understood that this was the power of the trial formation suppressing her. Because she had violated the rules of the trial formation was now beginning to retaliate. Durandal's guess was very accurate. This was indeed the trial formation's retaliation. However, she definitely didn't expect that this retaliation was actually in the hands of Guhan, and under Guhan's deliberate control, the entire trial formation's power was beginning to suppress her. I feel like I can't breathe. Durandal's body suddenly trembled. It wasn't the trembling of a physical body, but rather a distorted trembling caused by a bad television signal. Durandal's body was originally a doppelganger formed from a power seed, so it didn't have its own physical body. Therefore, it wasn't strange for it to distort like this. No, I can't fight against Zetian Gendi here. Durandal was finally suppressed by the trial formation's power. She began to take the initiative to seal her own power, and in the end, she was only left with the power of a sword-bearer. Only then did the trial formation's suppression suddenly disappear. Sure enough, only sword-bearers are allowed to appear here. Durandal shook her head. It wasn't that she felt that she wouldn't be a match for Guhan after becoming a sword-bearer. Even if she fell to ancient sword-bearer, with her experience and skills, Durandal was still confident that she could ruthlessly suppress Guhan. What she was worried about was that she wouldn't be able to fulfill her promise to use her full strength. I'm sorry, because of the suppression of the trial formation, this subject can't use his full strength. I can only fight you with sword-bearer strength. I'm sorry. Durandal sighed, then bowed to Guhan, apologizing for going back on her words. She didn't feel that her status as an immortal sword-bearer was very noble. A real knight. Seeing Durandal bow to him, Guhan felt touched in his heart. He loudly said to Durandal, "Sir Paladin, please don't take it to heart. Sooner or later, this subject will have an all-out battle with your main body. At that time, please don't hold back. Good, this subject will wait for the day you become an immortal sword-bearer." Durandal nodded, and with a horizontal slash of the sword in her hand, a powerful pressure burst out from Durandal's body. Except for a few people, almost all the onlookers were crushed to the ground by this gust of wind. Even if she was restricted to sword-bearer, Durandal's strength was not something that ordinary sword-bearers could withstand. "I'm also looking forward to this day. At that time, I will definitely defeat you fair and square," Guhan said to himself. At the same time, his figure flashed, and he appeared in front of Durandal. Guhan took the initiative to attack. 10 minutes later. Heavens, this person has actually been fighting with Sir Paladin for so long. On the stage, the battle between Guhan and Durandal was still going on. The spectators below the stage were all dumbfounded, especially the people from London. The Paladin in their hearts had already been fighting with Guhan for a full 10 minutes. Every single move had been exchanged for 10 minutes. Chapter 434. Durandal had no choice but to admit that she had underestimated this sword wielder. He was actually able to fight her to a standstill with just pure swordsmanship. Durandal had been fighting non-stop for a full 1,000 years. Even if her own talent in swordsmanship was not high, but under the tempering of these 1,000 years, her swordsmanship had reached a very terrifying level. Each of her swordsmanship seemed to have been forged through thousands of tempering. This kind of swordsmanship that had been honed over a long period of time was much more terrifying than those swordsmanship that were learned through innate talent. Therefore, Durandal had 100% confidence in her victory, because she felt that with just her swordsmanship alone, she would be able to teach this kid a good lesson on what true swordsmanship was. But Durandal had miscalculated. She found that the one who would really be taught a lesson was herself, even if her swordsmanship was actually much higher than Guhan's. Yes, no matter how heaven-defying Guhan's talent was, he had only practiced swordsmanship for less than 10 years. Compared to Durandal, who had honed her swordsmanship for thousands of years, they were simply not on the same level. Even Wang Shiji, the sage of calligraphy, had superb talent. But in the first few years of learning to write, his father still commented that his handwriting was not as good as that of his family's accountant, because that accountant had been keeping account books for more than 40 years. His handwriting had already integrated into his skin and flesh. How could Wang Shiji's short few years of practice compare to it? In fact, this was also the reason why there were not many swordmasters in the world. Even if it was the first time a sword maiden had awakened, their swordsmanship was honed in their previous life. This was especially so after they had experienced hundreds or even thousands of years of battles after the Great Calamity. Due to the accumulation of generations, their swordsmanship had reached an extremely high level. This level was not something that ordinary swordbearers with average talent in swordsmanship could achieve in just a few decades of life. Rather than having them fight Yuan Yang with their swords, they might as well let the sword ladies fight on their own. Only those with extraordinary talent in swordsmanship could possibly surpass their own sword maiden's swordsmanship through just a few years or even a dozen years of training. This was the reason why the profession of swordmaster was born. Let's cut to the chase and return to the main topic. The reason why Durand was at a disadvantage against Guhan was because Durand was not used to her current body. Durand had always fought with the physique of an immortal sword maiden. Now that she was suddenly compressed to the level of a treasured sword, her swordsmanship became uncoordinated and full of loopholes. It was easy to understand. If you asked a racer who drove an F1 car every day to suddenly drive a tractor, he might just drive the tractor straight into the field because he was not used to the speed. At the same time, Durandal was also not used to her current speed. Originally, according to her instincts, she felt that she would be able to hit Guhan in 0.01 seconds, but because her strength was suppressed to artifact sword grade, the time was extended to 0.1 seconds. This time, she was in big trouble. Before Durandal could even complete her attack, she instinctively wanted to change her attack. As a result, Guhan naturally took advantage of this flaw and directly broke through her defense to attack her. On one hand, Durandar was not used to her current body, but with the passage of time, she would definitely adapt to her current body very quickly. What really made Durandar feel sullen was that although she had been suppressed from immortal sword grade to artifact sword grade, the opponent's physique was still at the level of a famed sword grade. Inexplicably, in terms of raw strength, Durandar, who was an immortal sword grade, was suppressed by Guhan. Her full attack speed could not keep up with Guhan's attack speed at all. There was no martial art in the world that could not be broken, only speed could not be broken. If this went on, no matter how high Durandar's swordsmanship was, she would still be defeated by Guhan. Only Durandar and Guhan, the two people involved in the fight, knew what was going on. As for the spectators, they did not know what was going on. They only had one thought: this Guhan's swordsmanship was very strong, very scary. He was not human at all. It was like Alexander landing to be in the same generation as him. It must be known that the number one swordsman in the world, Sword Spirit Confusion, had once engaged in a pure swordsmanship battle with Durandar. That was when Sword Spirit Confusion was at its peak. At that time, Sword Spirit Confusion had just defeated the Maiden sword, who was known as the number one swordswoman in swordsmanship, and the head of the Liunyan family. These two people who stood at the pinnacle of swordsmanship and swordswoman's swordsmanship officially took the title of number one swordsman in the world. Then, he went to challenge Durandar. He fought with Durandar for a whole 12 hours, and only narrowly defeated Durandar by a single move. At that time, Sword Spirit Confusion said a very famous sentence to the media who interviewed him. Lady Durandar may not be the best swordswoman in swordsmanship, but she is definitely the most difficult to deal with. She can use her 1,000 years of fighting experience to wear down her opponent. From this, it could be seen how powerful Durandar was in the eyes of the swordswomen in London, and how terrifying her swordsmanship was. That was a swordsmanship that even Sword Spirit Confusion almost defeated. But now, their hero and idol had fallen into a complete disadvantage, actually being suppressed by a swordswoman who had just turned 18 years old a few days ago. This was something they could not imagine. In the eyes of these ignorant swordsmen, Sword Spirit Confusion was slightly stronger than Durandar, and Guhan was stronger than Durandar, but Sword Spirit Confusion was the number one swordsman in the world. Didn't this mean that Guhan's swordsmanship was already above Sword Spirit Confusion, and Guhan was the real number one swordsman in the world? Please forgive the small hearts of these inexperienced youngsters. They simply could not admit this fact, but in their hearts, they had faintly accepted this fact. The direct result of this was that when these swordsmen returned to their cities, an urban legend about a swordsman named Guhan began to spread among various cities. It was said that this person named Guhan was the real number one swordsman in swordsmanship. Of course, people who heard this urban legend would disdainfully laugh it off, treating it as a joke. It wasn't until this person named Guhan truly appeared in the eyes of humans that they understood that sometimes urban legends were not just legends. Unlike those ordinary swordsmen who had no swordsmanship to speak of, Liunyan Ling understood that she had already discovered the reason why Durandar was at a disadvantage. She was very puzzled. When did Guhan become comparable to a famous swordsman? Of course, this was not important. What was important was that Liunyan Ling had a vague feeling that she might not be Guhan's opponent without using the billion swords art. This was something that Liunyan Ling could not accept. Why? Why is your strength so abnormal? After clashing with Guhan again, Durandar asked while gasping for breath. Ever since the Bumi sword spirit, she did not know how long it had been since she had felt this kind of pressure. This junior obtained some benefits from Zetian Jendi. Facing Durandar's question, Guhan could actually ignore it. But if he did so, his good impression of Durandar would inevitably be greatly reduced. What's more, Durandar's true spirit of chivalry made Guhan feel admiration. He did not want Durandar to fight him with doubts, but it was impossible for Guhan to tell the truth, so he could only push the blame onto Zetian Jendi. If Durandar had the ability, then go ask Zetian Jendi. Could it be that Yi Qing is really? Durandar suddenly thought of something, and her whole person suddenly fell into contemplation. She actually put down the sword in her hand, no longer blocking or attacking. This was a huge opportunity. As long as Guhan seized this opportunity to attack Durandar, Durandar would definitely fall to the ground and eat a dog eating mud. However, Guhan did not make a move. Just like Durandar, he put down the heavenly sword in his hand and quietly waited for Durandar to wake up from her contemplation. "Hey, why didn't you make a move just now?" Durandar woke up from her contemplation and saw Guhan standing in front of her with a sword in his hand, unexpectedly not taking advantage of this opportunity to attack her. If he had made a move just now, although she would not have lost, she would definitely have suffered a huge loss. We have a saying in the East, "A gentleman does not take advantage of others when they are in a precarious situation." Sir, you have fallen into contemplation because of my words, so how could I make a move at this time? Guhan spoke with confidence, causing Durandar to look at him with more and more satisfaction. "You are good. You are really good." Durandar actually directly put away her sword and patted Guhan's shoulder as she asked with a smile, "Boy, do you think that you have already won just now?" "No, this junior's swordsmanship is not as good as Sir's. It is only because Sir is limited by this trial array that this junior was able to suppress you. Outside of this trial array, even 10 juniors together would not be a match for Sir." Guhan's words carried a hint of flattery. If it was just a simple contest of swordsmanship, as long as 2 Guhan attacked Durandar at the same time, Durandar would definitely be defeated. As for 10 or so, that was purely flattery. However, Guhan's words clearly made Durandar very happy. She waved her hand and said, "What do you mean by outside of the trial array, inside of the trial array? This is a fair duel, and in terms of swordsmanship, this junior has indeed lost to you. However, this is just swordsmanship. Let me ask you, can you block my Angel's Eternal?" Angel's Eternal. This was Durandar's basic skill, and the specific effect of the skill was a mystery. However, the skills of the Sword Lady at the Immortal Sword tier, even if they were basic skills, were extremely terrifying skills. If one only relied on the power of Ji Han, let alone taking a hit, even the slightest contact would cause Ji Han to immediately be sent to a medical pod. However, Guhan was not afraid of these skills. This was the trial array, Guhan's territory. As long as Guhan was willing, the power of the entire trial array could be used by Guhan at will. Using the trial array's power to offset Durandar's skill was a simple matter. However, Guhan naturally could not say this. He just shook his head sadly. How could this junior be able to block Sir's Angel's Eternal? In fact, the moment Sir appeared, I knew that I had already lost. The battle just now was just to make my defeat more dignified. Good, dignified. Durandar had thoroughly fallen in love with Guhan, this dignified child. She closed her eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. After a short while, she suddenly opened her mouth. "Your Majesty Dragon Shah, this subject has done her best, this subject has lost." She was just talking to her sword maiden, Dragon Shah Jendi. As a sword maiden's clone, she could still get in touch with Dragon Shah Jendi through the sword mark, even if she was trapped in the trial array at this time. After saying these short words, Durandar directly closed the communication with Dragon Shah Jendi, and then looked at Guhan and finally said, "Good boy, I'm leaving. This time, you owe me a favor. Remember, when you become a famous sword maiden, you must come to London to find me. I have a good friend who is waiting for someone to save her. I think you are that person." Chapter 435. Who would have thought that Durandal would actually give up fighting with Guhan, and instead readily admit defeat? Of course, the reason was not because she thought that Guhan was a good young man. From her last sentence, it could be heard that Durandal actually had something to ask of Guhan. She seemed to be hoping that Guhan could help her save someone. This person seemed to be Durandal's friend. Durandal's friend? Guhan thought for a while, but could not think of any human that Durandal wanted him to help her save. With Durandal's status in the human world, as long as that friend did not commit a great crime of betraying humanity, even if it was killing a few hundred ordinary people or a few sword-bearers, the Sword Council would still give Durandal face. Could it be that Durandal's friend was trapped in an area that humans could not control? Guhan could not think of any clues, but there was no harm in befriending Durandal. From a certain point of view, Durandal was more important to humanity than Gendi. If he forcibly took away the Emperor's sword this time, he would inevitably offend Longsha Gendi. With Durandal's help, he might be able to save himself a lot of trouble. Therefore, Guhan simply nodded and said to Durandal, "Guhan will remember your Excellency's words, Guhan will never forget it in his life. As long as Guhan's strength is enough, Guhan will definitely rescue your Excellency's friend." Good. 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 Durandal's serious face actually showed a rather bright smile. As a model knight, Durandal was famous for not smiling. Seeing Durandal smile was even rarer than seeing an iron tree blossom. "Listen, in." Durandal did not finish her words, when her face instantly changed, and she muttered in a low voice, "They came so fast. Remember to come to London to find me, a knight's word cannot be taken back." After Durandal dropped these words, her body completely dissipated like smoke. This was a sign that the will of the Sword Maiden attached to the power seed had left. Once the will of the Sword Maiden attached to the power seed left, it meant that the Sword Maiden clone was completely destroyed. The moment Durandal's body dissipated, Guhan, who was in control of the entire trial array, suddenly felt a powerful force begin to exert itself on the entire trial array. That power was like a sharp drill, trying to drill through the defensive array of the training array and enter the interior of the training array. This power was very powerful. It was so powerful that the entire trial formation was operating at full speed. Even the power that had been accumulated for hundreds of years could not stop this power from invading the trial formation. After all, this power was concentrated at a single point, and the trial array's power had to take care of the entire array. Guhan controlled the trial formation to resist for more than 10 seconds before he started sweating all over and was in a daze. He knew that he could no longer stop this power from attacking. To be able to stop the formation set up by one of the strongest Gendi in history, Gendi, it could only be the power of an Emperor sword. As for the audience, they were all confused. What was going on? Why had Lord Durandal disappeared? Could it be that Lord Durandal had been defeated by this Yuzhang city swordsman? What kind of joke was this? Lord Durandal had failed before he could even use his skill? Although it seemed that Lord Durandal had been suppressed in terms of swordsmanship, as long as Lord Durandal used his skill, even if Guhan was the best swordsman in the world, he would still be easily defeated. It was impossible for Lord Durandal to lose. Reinhard was even more confused. After summoning Durandal's Sword Maiden clone, Reinhard felt that he had already won. No swordsman could defeat Lord Durandal. However, Reinhard had never thought that Durandal would actually be defeated. He had been defeated without even using a skill. There must be a dirty deal going on here. Reinhard was dumbfounded and stupidly spat out such a sentence. If Durandal were to hear of this leading figure of London's sword-grade swordsman would probably experience what was called a real PY deal. What should I do? If I lose this duel, then at His Majesty's side. Reinhard now understood the feeling of wanting to cry but having no tears. Not to mention that he had lost the duel, he had also wasted Longsha Gendi's Sword Maiden clone. His crime was simply unforgivable. He could no longer stay in London City. Although after releasing Durandal, things were completely out of his control. Everything was Durandal's own decision. Just when Reinhard was secretly feeling sad, he suddenly saw Guhan's body tremble. Then, his mouth rapidly bulged like a fountain, spurting out an unknown amount of blood. Just like the character in the famous movie Before the Apocalypse, Stephen Chow and Gong Li, spurting out his own blood as if it was free. What happened? Reinhard didn't even have the time to be shocked. He felt the originally bright space suddenly turn dark. The space above his head was completely distorted. Then, the space was forcibly torn apart, and a pair of giant hands reached out from the torn space. This is the giant void hand. Reinhard was dumbfounded. What kind of plot was this? Why did a pair of giant void hands suddenly appear here? The giant void hand was an ability that only swordbearers of immortal sword grade and above could use. This was also the reason why Guhan desperately wanted to worship an immortal sword grade swordbearer as his master. He hoped that when he was about to lose his life, the giant void hand could save his life. Since the giant void hand could save people, Naturally, it could also kill people. At this time, this pair of giant void hands broke through the void for the purpose of killing people. No, to be precise, it was to snatch things. Give it to me. From the void came a somewhat illusory, somewhat hoarse, yet full of domineering and irrefutable voice. That is not something you should get. Longsha. Guhan gritted his teeth and spat out such a name. As soon as Durandal left, this giant hand appeared. Even a fool could guess that the owner of this giant hand was Reinhard and the master behind Durandal, Longsha Jendi. Seeing that his killing move had failed, he could only do it himself. Give it to me, don't make me do it myself. The giant hand stretched out a finger and placed it on Guhan's forehead. This was just an index finger, but it was a bit thicker than Guhan's head. Guhan could feel a destructive power from this finger. In the face of this power, even if Guhan used all his cards, it would still be impossible for him to resist this power. Just now, Guhan had mobilized all the power of the trial array he could muster to defend himself, but the result was still easily broken by Longsha Jendi's giant hand. Guhan knew that he might not be able to pass this hurdle, and he might not be able to keep this Emperor sword. Guhan grabbed the Emperor sword in his hand, trembling as he prepared to hand it over to Longsha Jendi. People under the eaves had no choice but to bow their heads. He, Guhan, was not a person who would waste time on an insignificant problem. This time, he was strongly oppressed by Longsha Jendi. If he still wanted to mix in the human world, if he still wanted Yuzhang City to receive the protection of Longsha Jendi at the critical moment, then he must endure this matter and hand over the Emperor sword. Today's humiliation, I will engrave it in my heart. In the future, when I ascend the throne, I will make you regret today's matter. Guhan's heart was bleeding, but what else could he do? He could only tell himself in his heart that this time's humiliation, he, Guhan, would definitely repay it in the future. Wait, the 29th generation descendant of the Lionian aristocratic clan, Lionian Ling, greets your majesty Longsha. Just as Guhan was about to hand over the Emperor sword, Lionian Ling suddenly appeared in front of Guhan. She cupped her fists and performed a standard etiquette to Longsha Jendi. So, it's Ling. It seems that you are all right. The lads of our city of London have successfully rescued you. This uncle is relieved. Longsha Jendi said flatly. Although he said that he was relieved, in fact, there was no trace of concern in his words. Humph, there is no need for our friends from City of London to rescue me. The one who really rescued Ling is the swordsman of Yuzhang City, Guhan. Your Majesty Longsha, if you want to thank someone, thank him, Lionian Ling said bluntly, causing Longsha Jendi to be speechless for a long time. Longsha Jendi's silence did not mean that Lionian Ling had nothing to say. She continued, Ling heard that this time, because of Ling's matter, the sword-bearers of the 8 major base cities have come together. Ling is deeply honored and grateful. Later, when Ling returns to the Lionian aristocratic clan, she will definitely give you a generous gift to thank you for today's kindness. Lionian Ling first thanked these sword-bearers of the 8 major base cities. In fact, they did not want to rescue Lionian Ling. Their fundamental purpose was actually the Emperor's sword in Guhan's hands. Their original plan was that if Longsha Jendi paid attention to his table manners and still wanted to save face, he would at most send a sword maiden's clone over. It was not like they did not have a trump card. But now, Longsha Jendi was completely shameless. He even used the giant void hand. This should be the ability to exert 1/10 of Jendi's strength. What trump card would not work in front of a living Jendi? There was no need to think about this Emperor's sword. Except for Yangjing City, which also had a Jendi behind it, no one else could think about it. However, since Lionian Ling had attributed the purpose of the sword-bearers of the various base cities coming here to her, she must have her own purpose. Sure enough, Lionian Ling continued, since you have rescued Ling, the matter has been settled. Your Majesty Longsha does not need to trouble you anymore. Your Majesty can go back now. In the future, Ling will definitely thank you in person. This was directly driving Longsha Jendi away. Lionian Ling was really outspoken. Fortunately, she had the Lionian family behind her, so Longsha Jendi did not dare to casually pinch her. If it was another person, Even if it was another descendant of the Jendi family, Longsha Jendi would still be able to deal with him. I have not seen you for a few years, but Ling has developed a pair of good teeth. Our coming here has nothing to do with you. It is only related to this sword. You can withdraw. Don't hurt the harmony between us and the Lionian family. For the sake of this sword, the Dragon Lion Sword Emperor had already thrown away his last shred of dignity. Chapter 436. So Your Majesty Longsha wants this sword. Lionian Ling rolled her eyes. Of course there is no problem, but Your Majesty may not know that this sword has now become a trophy of a duel. Before the end of the duel, this sword enjoys the protection of the duel rules. No one can touch it. Does Your Majesty want to violate the duel rules? The duel rules were rules that had been adopted by humans for hundreds of years, and were recognized by all humans and sword-bearers, not to mention that there were people from the Lionian clan present. Although with Jendi's strength, no one would really argue with Longsha Jendi if he forcibly broke the duel rules, but once this matter was spread out, Longsha Jendi's reputation among humans would instantly turn into a pile of mud, and his future record in the history books would not be so glorious. This might become a stain on Longsha Jendi's life. Big shots like Jendi valued their face the most and hoped that they could be immortalized through the ages. Therefore, even Longsha Jendi did not dare to blatantly violate the duel rules. Lionian Ling's idea was very simple. She wanted to contact Haotian Jendi and let Haotian Jendi intervene, lest the Emperor's sword really be taken away by the City of London. However, it was very troublesome to contact Haotian Jendi in the trial array. Lionian Ling needed time. As long as the duel continued and delayed enough time for Lionian Ling to contact Haotian Jendi, the ownership of the Emperor's sword was still unknown. So there is a duel here. Yes, the duel rules cannot be violated. Then I will wait until the duel is over. Longsha Jendi's voice buzzed. Lionian Ling breathed a sigh of relief. She immediately sent a message to Guhan, telling Guhan to hold back during the duel with Reinhard. The longer the better. It's useless. In less than a second, Guhan replied to Lionian Ling with such a message, which made Lionian Ling very angry. What do you mean by useless? Is he looking down on me for coming up with a way to stall for time? I admit defeat. I, Reinhard, lost. After a few seconds, Reinhard suddenly raised his hands and put the red hilt sword on the ground, which meant that Reinhard admitted defeat to Guhan. Don't you still have an ancient sword-grade sword mistress? Why did you admit defeat? Lionian Ling was anxious, but she quickly reacted. This was Longsha Jendi's order for Reinhard to admit defeat. Longsha Jendi had clearly seen that Lionian Ling wanted to stall for time, so he ordered Reinhard to admit defeat. Sure enough, Longsha Jendi quickly said, now that the duel is over, this Emperor's sword is no longer under the protection of the duel rules. Give this sword to us, and us will reward you with a death exemption edict. This reward is already enough. Longsha Jendi once again stretched out his hand towards Guhan. In order to block Lionian Ling's mouth, he also specifically expressed his willingness to grant Guhan a death exemption edict. The death exemption edict was something that could only be issued by Jendi. Don't get me wrong, it was not to let Guhan ignore the law and avoid death once, but when Guhan received a fatal attack, he would turn into an amber, wrap Guhan inside, and then travel through the void to return to Jendi's side. It was the strongest life-saving prop. The life-saving effect of the death exemption edict was even better than that of the giant void hand. After all, the giant void hand still needed a certain amount of time to be channeled. In case the sword-bearer could not survive this short channeling time, then they would die. But the death exemption edict was different. It belonged to the type that could be triggered immediately. As long as one encountered a life-threatening danger, it would automatically be triggered. Its life-saving effect was simply heaven-defying. Such a thing was naturally very precious. Jendi could only make one copy a year. Except for his closest people, he would not bestow it at all. Even Lionian Ling only had one copy of Haotian Jendi. Longsha Jendi had even taken out the death exemption edict. One could well imagine his determination towards the Emperor's sword. Moreover, in terms of morality and justice, Longsha Jendi had nothing to accuse him of. The other party had used the death exemption edict to exchange for it. For Guhan, it was absolutely not a loss. A person cannot be insatiably greedy. Seeing that Guhan was still hesitating, Longsha Jendi snorted, and the whole space began to tremble along with his cold snort. A coercion directly pressed down on Guhan's back, causing Guhan to stagger. One of his legs could not support him, and he directly knelt on the ground. Guhan could not say anything. Just when he was ready to completely accept his fate, suddenly, another powerful force began to impact the defense of the training array. The strength of this force was unexpectedly on par with the power of Longsha Jendi. It's Haotian Jendi. Guhan's mind cleared up. He knew that this was Haotian Jendi's giant hand. Jendi had finally arrived. Guhan promptly controlled the power of the training array to disperse, allowing Haotian Jendi's power to directly enter the training array without any hindrance. It tore open the void on the other side, and directly collided with Longsha Jendi's giant hand. Heavens, another giant void hand has come. A onlooker exclaimed. This is Haotian Jendi's giant void hand. Kanzu above, the two great Jendi of our human race have actually arrived. This is definitely the biggest news of the year. Another onlooker added. They had never thought that they could actually see the situation of two human Jendi confronting each other across the void. Being able to personally experience such a big event was enough for them to brag about for a lifetime. Big brother Haotian, you came really fast. Seeing that Haotian Jendi had already arrived, Longsha Jendi's voice became a little low. With Haotian Jendi here, he could no longer cover the sky with one hand. Fortunately, this training array does not seem to reject this old man's power. Second brother, you just consumed a lot of power to break through the training array. A long time ago, in order to make Jendi close to each other, under the initiative of Kunzu, all Jendi had to burn yellow paper and become sworn brothers. According to the time when they became Jendi, they would call each other big brother, second brother, and so on. Although this sounded a bit ridiculous, it was undeniable that under the name of brothers, the disputes between Jendi had indeed decreased a lot. Opening the way for big brother is what a little brother should do. Longsha Jendi's tone was very strange. In order to break through the defense of the training array, he had consumed a lot of the power of the giant void hand. Although it was not much, but in a confrontation between two Jendi, even a little less power was a fatal thing. Now he had naturally fallen into a disadvantageous position. If he really fought with Haotian Jendi, he would lose more than he would win. Then it's been hard on you, second brother. Haotian Jendi's tone was very gentle. There is no need to speak any insinuations between us brothers. Originally, I did not have much desire for this emperor's sword in Yangjing City. After all, I already have enough emperor's swords. I did not rush here immediately, which represents my attitude. Then why did big brother come here? Longsha Jendi coldly snorted. Because I did not expect that this sword was really that sword. Haotian paused, and his voice became extremely serious. He did not even address Longsha as his younger brother. Longsha, this is our Huaxia human clan's most precious sword. I will never let you take it to London City. You should understand the significance of this sword to our Huaxia people. I know. Hearing Haotian Jendi's words, Longsha Jendi also became serious. But big brother, I, Longsha, also have half of the Huaxia blood in my body. My London City also uses Chinese as its language and takes Huaxia as its ancestor. 2/3 of our London City is of Huaxia blood. Don't tell me that London City is not qualified to inherit this sword. Haotian Jendi was silent. Chen Shuang Jendi, the founder of London City, was also a Huaxia person. Most of the earliest citizens of London City were also of Huaxia blood. In the beginning, London City was even intended to be called Zhenyuan City. Just the word Zhenyuan alone showed the original flavor of London City's establishment. However, for various reasons, London City eventually separated from Huaxia. In the end, it still used the original name of London as the city's name. It absorbed a large number of English survivors and became a base city belonging to England. However, its relationship with Huaxia blood could not be cut off at all. Compared with the already sparse English blood, London City was closer to Huaxia blood. How about this? This sword will be temporarily kept by Yangjing City. Let's talk about its ownership when we meet. After a moment of silence, Hao Qianzhendi proposed such a solution. I refuse. Longsha Zhendi sneered. If the sword is in the hands of Yangjing City, do I still have a chance to get it? If you want to have a meeting, that's fine. But it will be temporarily kept by London City. We'll discuss it later. How about it, big brother? Sigh. Hao Qianzhendi sighed and stopped talking. A giant hand pressed directly toward Longsha Zhendi's position. This was the rhythm of a direct attack. Longsha Zhendi was not to be outdone, and the two giant hands collided. Because the two Zhendis' real bodies were not here, they could only rely on the power of the giant hands to collide with each other. This was the most direct collision of power. There was no fancy swordsmanship in it, and it was a competition of the purest strength. The two gigantic hands kept colliding against each other. The wind pressure generated from their collisions blew the surrounding swordbearers into the nearby walls. It was as if they had been nailed to the wall, unable to move at all. Zhendi's strength could be seen at a glance from this. If one was not an emperor sword, one would always be just an ant in front of an emperor sword. Even if it was an immortal sword-grade sword wielder, it was just a relatively large ant. In more than 3 minutes, the two giant hands collided no less than 100 times. It seemed that Hao Qianzhendi was gradually gaining the upper hand. After all, he did not consume any power to break through the defense of the smelting trial array. It was because of such a small advantage that Hao Qianzhendi had already gained the upper hand. Big brother, you forced me to do this. Suddenly, Longsha Zhendi uttered such a sentence, and then the void not far from Longsha Zhendi's giant hand was once again torn open. Another giant hand forcibly tore open the void and arrived at the smelting trial array. Longsha, you're crazy. Seeing two hands appear at the same time, Hao Qianzhendi knew that he was going to lose this battle. He had only gained a little upper hand. Once both of Longsha Zhendi's hands appeared at the same time, unless he also called for a second hand, he would not be able to win against Longsha. Not to mention whether Longsha would give Hao Qian time to call for a second hand. Did Hao Qianzhendi really have the courage to call for a second hand? Chapter 437. Whether it was Zhendi or a sword immortal, generally speaking, they could only use one giant void hand at the same time, and after using it, they would fall into a period of decline. This period of decline was about a week to a month for a sword immortal, but for Zhendi, it was only about a day. Therefore, the sword the Arch didn't have to worry about using the void hand. It was just 1 day. But if he used two giant void hands at the same time, then what awaited Zhendi would not be as simple as a few days of decline, which required Zhendi's lifespan to trigger. To use the second giant void hand, Zhendi's own blood and qi must be consumed, which was almost equivalent to lifespan for humans. Longsha Zhendi was young, and his blood and qi were vigorous. Using the second giant void hand would probably consume about a month of his lifespan, which was already an astonishing amount of time. As for Hao Qianzhendi, he was already old and did not have many years to live, so he was already in a state of insufficient blood and qi. If he forced his body to use the second giant void hand, it would not be a month of lifespan, but a year of lifespan. Therefore, it was absolutely impossible for Hao Qianzhendi to use the second giant void hand. Even if he was willing to use it, human beings would not. They were about to enter the difficult sword era, and if Zhendi could live one more day, it would be one more hope for human beings. How could Hao Qianzhendi waste a year to compete with human beings? When Hao Qianzhendi saw Longsha Zhendi use the second giant void hand, he knew that he had lost. He retracted his giant void hand, and could only say with infinite emotion, "It's good to be young." This sentence contained the bitterness of the clear sky sword emperor, and one could imagine how much bitterness it contained. Just when everyone, including Guhan himself, thought that the overall situation was settled and that the emperor sword could not escape from Longsha Zhendi's hand, something even more bizarre happened. Guhan only felt that the golden emperor sword in his hand began to shake violently. At first, he thought that Longsha Zhendi was forcibly taking the emperor sword from his hand, but he immediately discovered that it was actually the Emperor sword itself that was shaking. Soon, an electric shock-like attack made Guhan's palm numb. Guhan's tightly clenched hand unconsciously loosened, and the golden Jendi slowly floated in the air, just in the middle of Longsha Jendi and Haotian Jendi's confrontation. What's going on? Not only did these sword-bearers not understand, but even Longsha Jendi and Haotian Jendi, the two supremes of mankind, could not understand the reaction of this Emperor sword. Their control of power was meticulous, and they immediately discovered that the power that made the Emperor sword float in the air did not originate from the outside, but from its own power inside the Emperor sword. This made people unable to understand. They had never heard of a sword maiden without a sword-bearer moving on its own. Longsha Jendi and Haotian Jendi silently pondered over the Emperor sword suspended in the middle of them, trying to figure out what was going on inside. Unfortunately, they could not figure out the reason. After a while, Longsha Jendi finally could not bear it anymore. Although he was exuberant, maintaining his two giant hands was consuming his lifespan, and he could not afford to drag it on. Therefore, Longsha Jendi's two giant hands simultaneously stretched towards the golden Emperor sword in front of him, wanting to grasp it in his own hands. On the other side, Haotian Jendi's giant hands hesitantly moved, and finally chose to give up. If he tried to snatch it, it would only be a waste of his own power. Seeing that the Emperor sword was about to fall into the hands of Longsha Jendi, an earth-shattering sentence, a scene that Longsha Jendi would never forget for the rest of his life, an enduring topic that everyone would never get tired of, and a story that would be written in history textbooks and become a beautiful story, joke, for thousands of years, happened. This was a very clean and nimble sentence. This was a concise and clear sentence that went straight to the heart. This sentence was not elegant, but it was indeed the people's mantra. This sentence was not civilized, but it was more powerful than any sword, spear, sword, and halberd. This sentence only had 5 short words, but it could make anyone go crazy. This sentence was "I'll **ck your mother." This sentence was really loud and deafening. Everyone on the scene was shocked by this sentence, and their eardrums were hurting, and they were almost directly deafened. After their ears recovered with great difficulty, everyone began to guess who the person who had just said that sentence was. In fact, there was nothing to guess. As for the source of the voice, it could be heard at a glance. Everyone looked directly at the position of the golden Emperor sword. That earth-shattering sentence had come from there, from the body of the Emperor sword. However, everyone could not understand. Why could this sword speak? This was not logical. Unless she already had her own sword wielder, it was impossible for the sword lady to speak. Therefore, everyone's gaze instantly shifted to Guhan. This sword had never left Guhan's control from the beginning to the end. If there was someone who was synchronized with this Emperor sword, it would undoubtedly be Guhan. In the face of everyone's gaze, Guhan chose to remain silent. There was nothing to explain about this kind of thing. Whoever would believe it would be an idiot. That's right, there was another question. Whose mother did the Emperor sword want to **ck? The people on the scene were not idiots. Therefore, this thought only flashed past in a flash. Their attention returned to the Emperor sword. "Goddess, you've already awakened." Haotian Jendi was the first to break the silence. He spoke to the Emperor sword respectfully. The Emperor sword did not reply. "Goddess, I am Longsha Jendi. I hope to invite Goddess to stay with the Mayor of London. I will definitely meet all your requirements." This time, it was Longsha Jendi's turn to speak. "Idiot." This time, the Emperor sword did not remain silent. It gave Longsha Jendi a resounding answer. Incidentally, it also clarified a question about whose mother was the Emperor sword **king just now. This made everyone's itchy mood a lot more comfortable. The Emperor sword was indeed the Emperor sword. It could even curse people like this. "Goddess, please be careful with your words." If Longsha Jendi were here, then his expression at this time would certainly be very interesting. It was estimated that the expression of someone eating **t would be just like this. "Be careful with your mother's words." Another slap landed on Longsha Jendi's face. This time, Longsha Jendi really couldn't bear it. His two giant hands, mixed with Longsha Gendi's anger, grabbed towards the Emperor Sword with lightning speed. He wanted to take this Emperor Sword back and have a good chat with her about the principles of being a sword mother. Unfortunately, the Emperor Sword was not to be trifled with. Looking at the giant hands of Longsha Gendi, the patterns of the sun, moon, stars, mountains and rivers on the body of the Emperor Sword suddenly began to move. The next moment, a huge red sun suddenly flew out from the body of the Emperor Sword and directly collided with Longsha Gendi's giant hands. Longsha Gendi's giant hands didn't care about this red sun at all. Just like swatting a fly, it wanted to swat this red sun away. But something that Longsha Gendi had never expected happened. His giant hands slightly touched the red sun, and the flames on the red sun quickly ignited on the giant hands. Longsha Gendi's giant hands were composed of natural liquefied gas. In a flash, the entire giant hands were completely ignited by the red sun. The raging flames burned in the air, and the temperature of the whole room instantly rose by hundreds of degrees. Everyone felt as if they had entered a flaming hell, and their bodies were being crazily roasted. So hot, so hot. I'm going to faint. The sword-bearers of the sword rank were completely unprepared for this heat wave. In less than 2 or 3 seconds, the clothes of these people were completely soaked in sweat. Some of them had already suffered from severe heatstroke and directly fainted on the ground, losing their will. Only Guhan, who had received the blessing of the 2 sword maidens at the same time, had a good fire resistance. Therefore, he didn't collapse under the high temperature. Instead, he used the heavenly sword to support his body, and his brain and consciousness were still conscious. But there was only one Guhan. The sword-bearers of the sword rank here didn't have any fire resistance, so they all collapsed from heatstroke one after another. If this situation continued, it wouldn't take long, but within 30 seconds, about half of the sword-bearers here would die. Not good. At this critical moment, Haotian Gendi was still concerned about the backs of these people with great potential. His giant hands immediately split into hundreds of small hands, which covered the bodies of the sword-bearers who were being roasted, isolating them from the heat that could make people go crazy. With Haotian Gendi's protection, Guhan, who had begun to feel dizzy, instantly became spirited. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Guhan clasped his hands together in gratitude. "No need. Protect yourselves." Haotian Gendi's voice rang in Guhan's ears. This voice was very low, and it seemed that he was speaking to Guhan alone. This made Guhan's favorable impression of Haotian Gendi rise a lot. The flames in the sky burned for about 3 minutes, and the nearby stone walls gradually turned red from the heat. Longsha Gendi let out an unwilling roar, but he still couldn't stop his giant hands from burning, and could only dissipate the entire giant hands. Once the giant hands dissipated, the flames also lost their source of combustion, and disappeared together with them. This large area of flames came and went very quickly. If it weren't for the extremely high temperature still remaining in the air, people would have thought that nothing had happened just now. "Your Majesty, please calm down. This old man will no longer intervene in this matter. It's all up to Your Majesty." Seeing Longsha Gendi disappear, Haotian Gendi also expressed his attitude. Mother ****. Leaving behind such a last curse, the Emperor's sword slowly fell from the sky, and finally returned to Guhan's hands. Everything returned to normal. Chapter 438. What's the situation at the Mai Ling mountain range? Sword Immortal Baiju sat down on a chair, exhausted. He could only sleep for 4 hours a day. The large amount of work he had to do was taking up a lot of his time. Chairman, the Mai Ling mountain range has been completely occupied by Yuan Ku. However, because of your arrangements, the sword-bearers we left at the Mai Ling mountain range have all retreated safely. Not a single sword-bearer was lost, the person in charge of the intelligence department reported to Ju Wudao. 3 days ago, Yuan Ku from Fort Yuyang, who had been quiet for a long time, suddenly moved out. The target of these Yuan Ku was very clear, the Mai Ling mountain range. The mighty army consisted of tens of thousands of normal Yuan Ku, more than 10 nether and meteor Yuan Ku, and 2 U-realm Yuan Ku. If they wanted to destroy this Yuan Ku army, they would probably have to mobilize all of Yuzhang City's sword-bearers. However, according to the investigation team, there were at least 5 Yu-realm Yuan-Ku in Fort Yuyang. Who knew if this was Yuan-Ku's plan to lure the humans out of the fortified city and then destroy the humans' main force in the field? After thinking about it, Zhu Wudao decided to give up on the Mailing mountain range. He let the sword-bearers stay at the Mailing mountain range to return to Yuzhang City through the quantum teleportation formation. He also reduced the human security perimeter from 300 kilometers to 150 kilometers. This way, the sword-bearers in charge of investigation and security were a lot safer, but the humans' grasp of the surrounding area's intelligence was greatly reduced. What happened after that? Did Yuan-Ku do anything? Zhu Wudao continued to ask. Reporting, Chairman. After the Yuan-Ku army occupied the Mailing mountain range, they did not do anything else. Instead, they gathered in the Mailing mountain range. There are simply too many Yuan-Ku there. Our investigation team did not dare to go near at all. We don't know what's going on there either, the person in charge of intelligence said helplessly. We must find out why Yuan-Ku wants to occupy the Mailing mountain range. According to the records of previous great invasions, Yuan-Ku would either suddenly appear outside the city and launch an attack on the humans, or occupy the Yeyang fortress as a base to launch a protracted war against the humans. Although the Merlin mountain range had been occupied by Yuan-Ku before, it was only to eliminate the swordbearers guarding it. Yuan-Ku had never amassed so many troops in the Merlin mountain range like this, and then shut himself in as if he wanted to build a Fort Merlin there. Zhu Wudao's intuition told him that there must be a problem. Yes, I will order the Sky-Piercing Swords reconnaissance team to investigate the situation in the Plum Ridge mountain range, the person in charge of intelligence said quickly. The Sky-Piercing Sword team. Hearing this name, Zhu Wudao showed a distressed expression. They suffered heavy losses during the last reconnaissance of the Yuyang fortress. Have they recovered yet? Did you arrange a break for them? Chairman, you don't know this, but for the past few days, Sky-Piercing Swords team has been asking me to fight them. They say that they have rested for 10 days, and their bones are about to break. They want to go to war immediately and gather the latest information for Yuzhang City. The person in charge's face was also filled with emotion. He was not lying. Although every member of the Sky-Piercing Sword team had overdrawn their lifespan by an average of 30 years, and if they were to go out again, it was very likely that they would face death. However, these heroes were still willing to make such a sacrifice for the safety of Yuzhang City. Heroes. They are all heroes. Zhu Wudao did not know what else to say other than the word heroes. Tell them that if anything happens to them, Yuzhang City will never forget their contributions. If they have descendants, give them the right to live in the core area for 3 generations. If they don't have descendants, collect their sperm or eggs, find a suitable partner, and create a descendant for them. Also, guarantee the right to live in the core area for 3 generations. Do you understand? Yes, I will convey your words to them. This way, those heroes will have nothing to worry about, the person in charge said. That's all. Is there any other important information? Zhu Wudao felt sleepy. If there was no important information, he would go to sleep for a while. He had been working for 20 hours straight. There's no special news about the battlefield, but there's the latest news about Chongyang Mountain, the person in charge said. News about Chongyang Mountain. Zhu Wudao was energized. Did the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit send us a message? If he was most worried about the safety of Yuzhang City, then his son, Ku Rokin, was the second most worried. The team from Yuzhang City had been in Chongyang Mountain for 18 days, and he had not received any news from there. He did not know what the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit was doing. No, the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit didn't send us the news. The news came from the Haotian Palace in Yangjing City. The person in charge hesitated for a while. The Homi Sword Spirit in Yangjing City said that the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit left Chongyang Mountain early because he was worried about the situation in Yuzhang City. What is this guy doing? Didn't I tell him that our team is not allowed to leave Chongyang Mountain until they come out of the trial formation? Why did he come back? Did my words go in one ear and out the other? Although Zhu Wudao was angry on the surface, he was really touched. Knowing that Yuzhang City was in such a crisis, the eagle cat sword spirit still came back without hesitation. This meant that the eagle cat sword spirit valued Yuzhang City more than his own life. This was a good son of Yuzhang City. Where is the eagle cat sword spirit? Tell him to come and see me. Since he's back, I have a mission for him. Everyone in Yuzhang City is very busy now. I can't let him be alone. Zhu Wudao finally had a smile on his face. What Zhu Wudao did not expect was that after hearing his question, the person in charge of intelligence began to panic. This was not normal behavior. Did something happen? What happened? Tell me. Zhu Wudao slammed the table hard. President, after I learned that the eagle cat sword spirit had returned, I checked all the records of Yuzhang City. There was no record of the eagle cat sword spirit returning to Yuzhang City. We then asked Bat to investigate, but there was no record of the eagle cat sword spirit's personal terminal in Yuzhang City. We basically concluded that the eagle cat sword spirit did not return to Yuzhang City. At least, he did not enter Yuzhang City. The person in charge quickly told him everything he knew. What? The eagle cat hasn't returned yet? Zhu Wudao was stunned. If the eagle cat sword spirit returned to Yuzhang City on the day he entered Chongyang Mountain, then he had left Chongyang Mountain 18 days ago. Where was he? It was only a 5-day journey from Yuzhang City to Chongyang Mountain. It had been 18 days now. Shouldn't he have returned to Yuzhang City? Could it be that the eagle cat sword spirit is in danger? This thought suddenly popped into Zhu Wudao's mind. The entire Yuzhang City was surrounded by Yuan-ku. Only the road in the direction of Fujian was still under the control of humans. If the eagle cat sword spirit was unfortunately attacked by Yuan-ku on the way back, then the eagle cat sword spirit would be. Is there any other news? Zhu Wudao took 3 deep breaths to calm himself down. Is there any other clue about the eagle cat sword spirit? Even if it's just a small clue, report it to me. Yes, our people just went to Yangjing City to look for reinforcements. One of their famed sword-level swordbearers said that he found a very tragic battlefield 13 days ago. The marks on the battlefield were not left by a famed sword level, a flood dragon level, or a dragon level Yuan-ku. Our preliminary judgment is that there was a battle between a spirit sword-level swordbearer and a meteor-level Yuan-ku. Also, he found a damaged hover bus there. I've already asked about the wreckage of the bus. There's a 90% chance that it was the eagle cat sword spirit's hover bus. The person in charge reported. As expected, they encountered Yuan-ku. That eagle cat. Why did you come back? What are you doing? Zhu Wudao angrily pounded on the table. This table, which had been specially strengthened by the dimensional crystal mine, could not withstand such violent pounding and was directly smashed into pieces. This was the 7th table that Zhu Wudao had destroyed in the past 20 days. Don't be angry, Chairman. The sword-bearer said that after he saw the battlefield, he specifically searched within a 10-kilometer radius. In the end, he did not find any corpses, nor did he find the broken remains of the sword lady. At least the eagle cat sword spirit did not die in that battle. The person in charge hurriedly reported a piece of good news, which calmed Zhu Wudao's anxious heart a lot. Arrange an additional task for the sky-piercing sword team. If possible, ask them to help find information about the eagle cat sword spirit. However, whether the news is good or bad, and whether the eagle cat is dead or alive, they are not allowed to do anything. They are only responsible for gathering information, and nothing else, understand? Zhu Wudao said sternly. The sky-piercing sword team was good at scouting, but their combat ability was extremely weak. They could not even defeat an ordinary Yuan-ku of the same level. If the eagle cat sword spirit was captured, it would definitely be closely guarded by Yuan-ku. If the sky-piercing sword team attacked, only death awaited them. Yes, I will remind the sky-piercing sword team. The person in charge nodded. Chairman, there is still some news about Chongyang Mountain. Would you like to continue listening? Tell me, what happened to Chongyang Mountain? What happened to our Yuzhang City team? Also, why did the news come from Yangjing City's Haotian Palace? Shouldn't this kind of thing be conveyed to us by the Yangjing City Sword Committee? Because this news was personally told by His Majesty Haotian. At the mention of Haotian Jendi, the person in charge revealed a look of admiration and joy. His Majesty Haotian said that the Emperor's sword has appeared, and it is now in the hands of Yuzhang City. There really is the Emperor's sword there. Zhu Wudao was stunned. And it is in the hands of Yuzhang City? Yes, this is absolutely true. His Majesty Haotian said it himself. There is absolutely no falsehood, the person in charge said with certainty. This eagle cat. Zhu Wudao's face was full of regret. If the Emperor's sword was lost on the way, even if he died 10,000 times, he would not be able to face the ancestors of Yuzhang City. *CK his grandmother. Alright, Zhu Wudao's attitude towards the eagle cat sword spirit had changed 360 degrees. I dialed correctly. Chapter 439. Young man, what's your name? When all the smoke had dissipated and Longsha Jendi's giant hands were completely anchored, Haotian Jendi's hundreds of giant hands merged back into one and placed them in front of Guhan, asking kindly. This lowly one, Yuzhang City's treasure sword grade swordsman Guhan, pays respect to your Majesty Haotian. May your Majesty live for 10,000 years. Guhan immediately knelt down on one knee and said to Haotian Jendi. Guhan? Haotian Jendi's voice was obviously stuck, and he didn't say a word for a long time. This made Guhan speculate in his heart that he didn't know what had gone wrong. He seemed to have offended Longsha Jendi, so he couldn't offend Haotian Jendi as well. Grandpa Haotian, you finally came, he. Ling pays respect to Grandpa Haotian. Liuanian Ling suddenly moved to Guhan's side, leaned on Guhan's shoulder, and also saluted Haotian Jendi's giant hands. However, Liuanian Ling didn't call him Your Majesty, but called him Grandpa, which was more intimate. Obviously, the relationship between Liuanian Ling and Haotian Jendi was much closer. It wasn't surprising, as the descendants of the Liu Nian clan had a close relationship with Jendi. This lowly one, XX City's treasure sword grade swordsman XXX, pays respect to your Majesty Haotian. May your Majesty live for 10,000 years. Seeing Liuanian Ling kneel down, the rest of the treasure sword grade swordsman suddenly came to a realization and knelt in front of Haotian Jendi's giant hands. Just now, when Longsha Jendi's giant hands appeared, the scene was so shocking that they forgot the basic etiquette after seeing Jendi. It was really too shameful. Fortunately, this time, Guhan and Liuanian Ling remembered, or they would have forgotten about it again. Rise. Haotian Jendi obviously didn't have much interest in other people's greetings. All his attention was on Liuanian Ling. You little girl, you've caused so much trouble because of you. You even called me over. Tell me, how are you going to thank your grandpa Haotian? Hearing Liuanian Ling's words, Haotian Jendi's attitude clearly eased. Grandpa, don't be angry. I'll bring you a bottle of 2016 Marotai from my house for you. I guarantee that it's the best bottle. Fleeting Lin chuckled. TSK, the Fleeting Time family was indeed capable. Marotai in 2016. It was already 992 years ago. What would it taste like? It's already 992 years ago. What would it taste like? Only Liuanian Ling had this kind of old thing. If it were other families, they wouldn't have the ability to protect it. To be able to preserve a bottle of white wine for almost 1,000 years, this was not something that could be achieved with ordinary technology. Okay, Grandpa will wait for your Marotai. Haotian Jendi laughed. Ling, come back quickly. You don't know, when your old man went missing, he mentioned your name to me 7 or 8 times a day. Grandpa's ears were almost broken by him. Okay, after we get out of here, Ling will go back to Yangjing City. Liuanian Ling nodded vigorously. It seemed that she was really homesick. Well, very good. Haotian Jendi's giant hand covered Liuanian Ling's head and gently stroked it. He was really like a kind and amiable grandpa who took pity on his granddaughter. Ling, Grandpa has one more thing to ask you. When the Clear Sky Sword Emperor said this, his tone suddenly jumped out with a hint of playfulness. What is your relationship with this Jiu Han kid? Grandpa doesn't remember you being so close to a boy. Shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand. Grandpa. Liuanian Ling showed a rare shyness on her face. Don't I always sit on Grandpa's lap? Isn't Grandpa a boy? Ha ha ha. Hao Tianjendi laughed heartily. This kid is interesting. When he comes to Yangjing City in the future, bring him to Grandpa. Grandpa will help you see if this kid is worthy of the daughter of Liuanian family. TCH, ignore Grandpa. His mouth stinks. Although Liuanian Ling said that Hao Tianjendi's mouth stinks, she did not have any intention of rejecting Hao Tianjendi's help. Yes, her intention was very clear. Next, Liuanian Ling and Hao Tianjendi had a conversation about family matters. Naturally, Guhan could not interrupt. His eyes wandered slowly and suddenly saw Song Yifei kneeling there with a sad expression. Her eyes were filled with sorrow. What's wrong with her? Guhan felt an inexplicable pain in his heart when he saw Song Yifei's expression. He wanted to go up and ask her, but Hao Tianjendi was still in front of him. If he left now, it would be too disrespectful to Hao Tianjendi. After hesitating for a while, Guhan still did not move. He continued kneeling in front of Hao Tianjendi. At this time, Song Yifei was indeed in a state of sadness and bitterness. Originally, the relationship between her and Liuanian Ling had gradually eased. It could even be said that they had become good friends. However, when she saw how close Liuanian Ling and Hao Tianjendi were, and how Hao Tianjendi and Liuanian Ling were like grandfather and grandson, Song Yifei felt a deep sense of inferiority. Compared to Liuanian Ling, who was the eldest daughter of the Liuanian family, what was she? Why did Guhan like her? Especially when she heard that even Hao Tianjendi teased Liuanian Ling and even invited Guhan to see him because of Liuanian Ling, Song Yifei's emotions were on the verge of breaking down. If Guhan and Liuanian Ling were together, he could directly fly to the court and become Jendi's guest, the future son-in-law of the Liuanian family. Seeing Guhan and Liuanian Ling kneeling side by side, Song Yifei was like a newlywed couple about to bow to the heavens and the earth. After today, the news about Guhan and Liuanian Ling would definitely spread across the 8 base cities. From word of mouth, people would definitely know that the heir of the Liuanian family was with Guhan, a young talent from Yuzhong City. This young talent was very powerful and had the number 1 sword, the Sky Reliant sword, as the sword lady. His swordsmanship was superb and he was an excellent sword master. He was a perfect match for Liuanian Ling. Who would know that there was another Song Yifei in Yuzhong City? How could Song Yifei not be sad when he saw this? How could he not want to cry? My dear friend, your heart is crying. All of a sudden, Song Yifei heard a voice from his purple palace. It was the Netherworld Iris sword. It was talking to Song Yifei through the sword mark. Of course I'm going to cry, Song Yifei said bitterly. I can only cry. What else can I do? Amitabha. My dear friend, the sea of emotions knows no bounds. Repent before it's too late. The Prajna sword also advised. But I don't want to turn back. I don't want to turn back. If I turn back once, I won't be able to look forward anymore. I won't give up. I won't give up. Song Yifei closed his eyes. His voice was filled with determination. But my dear friend, compared to that woman from the Liuanian family, you're really... The Netherworld Iris sword seemed to be unable to continue. It could only sigh. How am I compared? Song Yifei sneered with tears in his eyes. His expression was strange and cold. My talent is also top-notch. My innate sword essence can also become a sword-bearer. If I were born in a family like Liuanian Ling, do you think I would be inferior to Liuanian Ling? Amitabha. My dear friend, there's already a demon in your heart. You should quickly turn back. The Prajna sword sighed. I said that I won't turn back. Song Yifei clenched his teeth. Why should I turn back and not Liuanian Ling? My dear friend, since the two of you aren't willing to turn back, then the only path you can take is to surpass the other party. The Netherworld Iris sword said indifferently. I have a path full of thorns and twists. I wonder if my dear friend is willing to take this path? Amitabha, I'm leaving. Otherwise, these old bones of mine won't be able to hold on much longer. Hao Tianjendi finally ended his conversation with Liuanian Ling. Maintaining the gigantic hand consumed a lot of energy. It would be a great burden for Jendi if he used it for too long. Hao Tianjendi suddenly said to Guhan, Guhan, and the people of Yuzhong City, return to Yangjing City with Ling after we leave the trial array. This. Guhan refused. Your Majesty, I heard that Fort Yeyang has been conquered by Yuan Ku. Yuzhang City is in need of strength now. How can I go to Yangjing City? You still don't know, but the entire Yuzhang City is surrounded by Yuan Ku. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to return to Yuzhang City. It's that old man Baiju who ordered you to return to Yangjing City with the team from Yangjing City. I'm just passing on his message. Hao Tianjendi said in a low voice, Fine, I've already passed on my message. You can decide what to do next. With that, Hao Tianjendi's gigantic hand dissipated instantly. The oppressive aura also disappeared along with the gigantic hand. According to the trial array, Hao Tianjendi had really left. Guhan, Grandpa Hao Tian is right. I think you should come back with us. Liuyan Ling was about to persuade Guhan to return to Yangjing City with her. However, when she turned her head, she realized that Guhan, who had been by her side just a moment ago, had disappeared. In an empty room in the trial array, the space was suddenly torn open. Guhan jumped out of the torn space. He had come here to solve the last remaining problems. Guhan controlled the trial array and searched the entire space. Finally, he found his target in a corner. With a thought, the space was torn open. A white cat seemed to be caught by something and was thrown out from the other side of the space crack. After a while, a sickly husky and a lifeless black bear were also thrown out. The three Egyptian gods once again gathered in front of Guhan. Chapter 440. Congratulations, my lord. Congratulations, meow. Meow. Bastet was a cat, after all. She was the smartest and had the fastest reaction. She straightened up and bowed to Guhan. Congratulations, my lord, on successfully taking over the entire trial formation, meow. Bastet congratulates my lord, meow. Seeing that she had been moved to this place by Guhan, Bastet knew that Guhan had already taken control of the entire trial formation, and their agreement with shrouding the heavens Jendi was finally about to be fulfilled. How could this Egyptian god, who had been trapped for more than 700 years, not be excited? Well, I have to thank you too, Bastet. Without your reminder, I wouldn't have been able to defeat this idiot and master the yin-yang swordsmanship. Guhan glared at Ice, who was lying on the ground pretending to be dead. Stop pretending. I know you're still alive, Ice. Didn't you want to kill me just now? I'm here now. You can do it now. Ice did not speak. It seemed that she planned to play dead until the end. It was not up to Ice to play dead. The entire trial formation was now under Guhan's control. With just a thought, Guhan could make Ice beg for death. How would Ice dare to act tough in front of Guhan? She could only hope that playing dead would appease Guhan. This was like being called to the office by the class teacher. The best thing to do was to lower your head and keep silent. If you continue to play this game with me, I'll feed the divinity to this husky right now. Seeing that Ice still did not speak, Guhan used his ultimate move. Sure enough, after hearing Guhan's words, the bear that was pretending to be dead finally got up from the ground. What do you want? At most, you can take my life away, Ice said very shamelessly. It seems that your spirit has recovered. You know how to be afraid of me, Guhan sneered. Compared to Ice's previous anger, Ice now had awe and fear in her bones. The anger that had been controlling her seemed to have disappeared. What proved this even more was that Guhan discovered that Ice's strength was no longer at the meteor rank. She was now on the same level as Bastet and Anubis. She was also at the soul rank level of Yuan Ku. The reason why Ice was able to break through sky-covering Jendi's restriction and break through to the meteor rank was because of that inexplicable anger. Now that the meteor rank power had disappeared, Ice naturally lost that strange emotion. Who's afraid of you? Isis tried to maintain her dignity, but in fact, she had already started to give in to Guhan. She tried to shift the blame. But I was really strange before. I wanted to kill you for no reason. It's not my fault. I should have been controlled by someone. Do you know who controlled you? Guhan asked again. Or did you come into contact with something before your emotions changed? No, I became like that when I woke up from hibernation. Ice Eyes shook her head. It seemed that she would not be able to get anything out of her. She was also confused. And you, Anubis, have your injuries not healed yet? The husky that was called out by Guhan stood up and stuck out his tongue. He then raised one of his legs. A blood-red wound was clearly visible, and blood was still flowing out of the wound. The power that injured Anubis is very strange. There seems to be a mysterious power attached to his wounds. This power has completely prevented Anubis' wounds from healing. If we still had our original strength, we could have easily gotten rid of that power. But now that we have lost our divinity, there is nothing we can do about this wound. Anubis can only rely on constantly producing new blood to replenish the blood lost from the wound. Otherwise, Anubis would have died of blood loss. The power that can't heal the wound? Guhan vaguely remembered where he had seen such power, but unfortunately, he could not recall it for a while. Let me take a look at your wound. Guhan grabbed Anubis' leg and pulled it in front of him. His finger touched the wound lightly. Suddenly, Guhan felt a tingling sensation on his finger. It was like the feeling of popping candy bouncing in his mouth. Then, something miraculous happened. The wound that had been unable to heal began to heal rapidly under the touch of Guhan's fingers. In less than 5 seconds, the wound that had tormented Anubis for nearly a month had completely healed. Woof woof woof. Thank you, Your Majesty Guhan. Woof woof woof. Anubis, the husky, returned to his normal self the moment his wound healed. He jumped up from the ground and jumped around wildly in celebration of his new life. Unfortunately, there was no toilet paper around. Otherwise, he would have torn a few rolls of toilet paper to celebrate his new life. Call me Lord Guhan, you idiot. Bastet, the white cat, jumped onto the husky's head and kicked the husky's nose hard. Guhan did not pay any attention to these two guys who were playing around with each other. He used his spiritual sense to check the meridians and zifu of his body, and after discovering that there was no abnormality in his body, he opened his eyes in doubt. When Anubis' wound was healing, Guhan felt something enter his body through the husky's wound. But no matter how he searched, he did not find anything unusual. He hoped that Guhan was wrong. Stop messing around. I summoned you here because there is something I need to deal with. Guhan clapped his hands. After I took control of the entire trial array, I learned a lot about it. Back then, Zetian Jendi did have an agreement with you. Now, you can leave this place. You are free. As soon as Guhan finished speaking, a spatial door opened in the room. On the other side of the door was a world of birds, flowers, and lush trees. It was a world of freedom. We are free. Bastit's voice trembled. After waiting for more than 700 years, this moment had finally come. Old cat. Are we really free? Is he not going to hold me accountable? Isai's eyes were also filled with tears. She thought that Guhan would punish her harshly, and then make things difficult for them. Perhaps he would never fulfill his promise to set them free. She did not expect Guhan to be so straightforward. She was so touched and excited. Woof, woof, woof. Anubis expressed his joy in his usual way. The other side of the door is the other side of Chongyang Mountain. You can leave this place through this door. The trial array will no longer restrict you. I will not violate His Majesty Zetian's promise to you. You are really free, Guhan said solemnly. Actually, Guhan was not lying. He was telling the truth. The other side of the door was indeed a world of freedom. The trial array would no longer restrict them. As long as they left this place, they would no longer have anything to do with Guhan. Hearing this, Guhan felt a bit stupid. These 3 Yuanhuas had the foundation of universe-level Yuanhuas and were the most useful subordinates in this trial formation. The other memory fragments were one-time use items. Only these 3 Yuanhuas could be used repeatedly. It went without saying that they would be a great help to Guhan in the future. And right now, Yuzhong City was in a huge crisis. These 3 universe-level Yuanhuas might be able to turn the tide and save the entire Yuzhong City from this disaster. No matter how he thought about it, Guhan shouldn't really let them go. It was too much of a loss. Of course, Guhan wasn't that stupid. Or rather, these 3 yuan coups weren't that stupid. After a short moment of excitement, Bast was the first to realize that something was wrong. Master Guhan, shouldn't you remove the seal on our godheads? Bastet had a flattering smile on his face. This was really difficult for him. As a cat, it was such a difficult thing to make his face show a flattering expression. Godheads. Guhan smiled evilly. P.S. Damn, when I use the word evilly, I feel like I'm even more devilish. What godheads? Naturally, it's our godheads. His Majesty sealed them when we were locked in the training formation. Please help us remove them as well. Oh, you're talking about that. Guhan continued to smile evilly. Then, he decisively refused. No, I can't remove the seal on your godheads. What? Upon hearing Guhan's words, Isis almost jumped up from the ground. If you don't remove the seal on us, then we'll be damned Soul Realm Yuan Ku for the rest of our lives. If we meet 1 or 2 trash swordbearers or Yuan Ku, we'll be killed. We'll just be sending ourselves to our deaths if we go out. What does that have to do with me? Guhan looked at the 3 animals with disdain. I'm a human, and you're Yuan Kus. We're natural enemies. How can I let 3 universe realm Yuan Kus go out? So that you can continue killing swordbearers? If it weren't for the fact that you've served His Majesty Shroud Heaven for so long and that you have an agreement with His Majesty, I'd kill you right now. A Soul Realm Yuan Ku is still a Yuan Ku. Who knows, there might be ancient Sword Realm swordbearers who die in your hands. It's better to kill them all as soon as possible. Woof woof. The husky began to jump again. It seemed that whether it was angry or excited, it always jumped around to express its inner feelings. Was this dog easy to figure out or hard to figure out? Mr. Guhan, you said that we have an agreement with His Majesty Shroud Heaven. Are you going to go against our agreement and trample on His Majesty Shroud Heaven's reputation? Bast was helpless. Everything was in other people's hands, and the only thing they could make Guhan worry about was the agreement with Shroud Heaven Jendi. Of course, I respect His Majesty Shroud Heaven's decision. Ji Han smiled evilly and snapped his fingers. A thick stack of white paper filled with words the size of a fly floated down from the sky. Look, this is the agreement you signed with His Majesty Shroud Heaven to guard the trial formation. His Majesty has kept it in a room. It's been 700 years, and it's still in good condition. Looking at the contract in front of them, the 3 gods of Egypt looked like they had seen a ghost. Ji Han had actually found this contract. Or rather, Yi Qing had actually left this contract here. If they had known this would happen, they would have found this contract and destroyed it instead of doing anything else in the past 700 years. Chapter 441. Why is this contract still here? Didn't you search the entire trial formation and not find it? Bast complained to Isis. After they had been imprisoned in the trial formation, Bast and the other 2 had looked for the contract once. In the end, they had found nothing, so they had thought that the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor had taken the contract away and had not hidden it in the trial formation. It's my fault. Why don't you say it's Anubis's fault? He's a dog. What does it have to do with me if his nose can't smell anything? Isis snorted and then threw the blame on Anubis. Big sister, please. He's a husky. Can you count on a husky's nose? Bast said painfully. Isis was instantly speechless. You can count on anything in this world, but don't count on a husky. Okay, you've said enough. Guhan threw the contract in front of Isis and the other 2. The agreement about your release of freedom is in Article 111. Article 111 says that when Guhan takes control of the trial formation, he will return to the 3 gods, Isis, Bast, and Anubis, absolute freedom. They are not allowed to go back on their word, hunt, arrange ambushes, and so on. He must ensure that these 3 gods can live as they please. Unless these 3 gods are stained with human blood again, Guhan and Guhan's men, relatives, friends, and all related people are not allowed to hurt them. Guhan said concisely. In fact, the provisions were very strict. Article 111 alone used more than 500 words to describe it. It was to ensure that Guhan would give Bast and the other two absolute freedom according to the treaty. That's right. Bast plucked up his courage and said, "Isn't sealing our divinity restricting our absolute freedom? Absolute freedom also includes our divinity. Okay, do you think I'm careless and didn't read all the clauses clearly? There's also Article 132 here. This is the treaty about lifting the seal on your divinity," Guhan said with a sneer. Upon hearing Guhan mention Article 132, Bast's last hope that Guhan was careless and did not read all the clauses was shattered. Rule 132 says that if you want to remove the seals on your guardhoods, you must take the initiative to help and maintain the trial formation. When Guhan enters the training formation, you must immediately appear in front of Guhan and explain the rules of the training formation in detail. You must also secretly protect Guhan and not let him get hurt in the training formation. You must also control the pace and make sure that Guhan is always in the lead. Bast and the other two were required to do a lot of things. There were more than 30 things in total. Basically, it was a cheat for Guhan. Guhan looked at it and thought, good heavens, if Bast and the other two did all of these things, Guhan would have successfully reached the top on the first day of entering the trial dungeon. How do you know that we didn't do these things? Bast was still quibbling. These are all done in secret. Of course, we are helping Lord Guhan in secret. Lord Guhan, aren't you the first person to enter the finishing line? Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Bast did not help Guhan at all. At most, he ran over to Guhan and explained the ins and outs of the matter to Guhan when he was defeated by Ice Eyes. Other than that, he did not do anything. At the very least, he did not do the first requirement of explaining the rules of the trial formation at the beginning. Well, these are all done in secret. Guhan sneered and glossed over this condition. No problem, he still had the 135th condition, the one that Bast could not refute. The 135th condition requires you to defend the finishing line. However, you are not allowed to stop Guhan from entering the finishing line. You can only stop other sword-bearers from approaching the finishing line. Guhan threw the contract on the ground. Ice Eyes, what were you doing at that time? Bast could not refute this condition. This was also the reason why he gave up on doing the 132nd condition. With Ice Eyes blocking his path like a lunatic, he was destined to be unable to remove the seal on his guardhood. What was the point of fawning over Guhan? Bastet instantly went limp and could no longer muster any strength. He was almost a useless cat now. All right, the facts are very clear. According to the contract between you and Yi Qing, there is no need for me to remove the seal on your guardhood. You can leave now and enjoy your life of freedom after 700 years. Guhan gestured for Bast and the other two to leave. Woof woof. Anubis looked at Bast with incomparable sorrow. It had to be said that a husky's expression was very pitiful when it was sad. Even Ice Eyes looked at Bast pitifully. They were all hoping that Bast, the smartest among them, would be able to find a way to remove the seal on their guardhood. Just tell us, my lord. What do you want us to do in order for you to remove the seal on our guardhood? Bast looked at Jiyu Han with an ashen face. He suddenly understood. Jiyu Han must have wanted to discuss some conditions with them. That was why he put out this contract. If Guhan really didn't want to remove the seal on their guardhood, why would he go through all this trouble, gathering them together, taking out the contract and saying so much nonsense? Guhan had also read out the entire contract. Given his understanding of Guhan's character, Guhan would never waste time on such things. He definitely had something up his sleeve. All right, since you can see it, I won't keep you in suspense. I can remove the seal on your guardhood, but you have to help me fight and become my helper. Help me just like how you helped Zhe Tian Jendi back then. Guhan finally revealed his purpose. Then, like Zhe Tian Jendi, you want to trick us into staying in this damned trial formation for 700 years? Bast had more or less guessed what Guhan wanted. These three unlucky fellows, other than their abilities, did not have anything else that Jiyu Han coveted. No, I can sign a new contract with you. When I become an immortal sword wielder, the contract will automatically end. I must give you absolute freedom and remove the seal on your guardhood, Guhan said calmly. Guhan said indifferently, if you really understand me, then you should also know that I am a person who keeps my words. Even if you are Yuan Ku, I will still keep my promise. However, after you get your freedom, you must join the free city and become an absolutely neutral free person. If you are willing, we can sign the contract now. If not, you can leave. We need to discuss this. After Bast said that, he pulled Isais and Anubis to the side and began to discuss in a low voice. Although it was a discussion between the three gods, Anubis did not participate at all. He just kept barking. The ones who were really arguing were Bast and Isais. Isais wanted to leave immediately. She had had enough of being a subordinate of humans. More importantly, she had been trapped for 700 years. Therefore, Isais was determined to leave. Even if she could only be a soul rank Yuan Ku, it was better than continuing to be a dog of humans. Woof, woof, woof. Upon hearing Isais' words, Anubis replied. Isais' face was as disgusted as if she had eaten dog poop. Guess what Anubis said? Isais, I don't want to persuade you. If you are really willing to be a soul rank Yuan Ku and abandon your godhood forever, I can only bless you. Bast's attitude was also very firm. He was willing to believe in Guhan once and become his subordinate. When Guhan became an immortal sword-bearer, he would be free. As for whether Guhan could become an immortal sword-bearer, neither Bast nor Isais had any doubts. After all, their relationship with Guhan was far from as simple as Guhan knew. Are you going to separate from me? Isais almost jumped when she heard Bast say this. Didn't the three of us agree to never separate in this world? Then bear with it. Bear with it for another 10 years. Bear with it until Guhan becomes an immortal sword-bearer, Bast said through gritted teeth. Don't forget how old Guhan was when we first saw him. Maybe we can get our godhood back in less than 10 years. 700 years have passed. Can't you even get through 10 years? At the very least, we can live outside for 10 years. It's just that we have to be restrained by Guhan. It's not like we haven't been under Guhan's control before. It's not a big deal. Probably because Bast's words had an effect, Isais fell silent. She thought for a long time. As a former god, it was more painful for them to give up the godhood that symbolized the glory of the gods to be a small soul rank Yuan Ku. Therefore, Isais finally agreed. As for Anubis, he was just a husky. She did not need to care about what he thought. It seems like you have an idea. Guhan smiled, then took out a pen and paper. He wrote a contract on the spot and handed it to Bast. Bast read the entire contract very carefully. Compared to Yi Qing's contract, which had more than 140 clauses and 50 pages, Guhan's contract was very simple. From the moment the contract was signed, Bast, Isais, and Anubis became Guhan's subordinates. They would listen to Guhan's orders, carry out the tasks assigned by Guhan, and protect Guhan's life. Without Guhan's permission, the three of them were not allowed to leave a 20-kilometer radius around Guhan. Without Guhan's permission, they were not allowed to show their true strength. Usually, they had to appear in the form of animals. Guhan was not allowed to insult the reputation and dignity of Bast, Isais, and Anubis. He was not allowed to order them to do anything that would damage their dignity. If a human sword-bearer or Yuan Ku attacked them, they had the right to fight back. However, they could only knock out the human sword-bearer. They were not allowed to kill them. Yuan Ku did not have this restriction. Guhan could not let them do tasks that would lead to certain death, or tasks that were beyond their ability. As long as they obeyed orders, Guhan could not interfere with their daily lives. He had to provide them with accommodation, food, bathing, holidays, mating, and other rights that animals naturally enjoyed. The contract lasted until the day Guhan became a sword-bearer at the level of a fairy sword. When Guhan became a sword-bearer at the level of a fairy sword, the contract would automatically end. Guhan had to completely remove the seal on their godhoods and give them freedom. However, they could not join Yuan Ku's camp. Instead, they had to join the Freedom Metropolis. In the future, they were not allowed to actively attack humans or kill humans. Otherwise, Guhan would hunt them down. All in all, This was a contract that was very considerate of Bast and the other two. At the very least, they were given the greatest respect for their dignity. This made Bast and the other two heave a sigh of relief. Finally, they made a cut on their claws and used their own blood to paint their claws red. Finally, they imprinted it on the contract. This was probably the funniest contract in history. Other than Guhan's own name, there were only 3 red paw prints of different sizes. It was as if his own pet had accidentally pressed on it. Chapter 442. Where did you go? How come I can't see you? When Guhan reappeared in the hall, Liuyan Ling came up to him. Guhan, who was just beside her, disappeared in the blink of an eye. Liuyan Ling was so scared that she thought it was Long Shijendi who had secretly captured Guhan. The heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor left behind his last words. He asked me to be in charge of the operation of the entire trial formation so that more sword-bearers could come here to train in the future. After all, you can fight with a real Yuan Shen here. Sword Maiden Online can't compare to this. Guhan said. The main purpose of the trial formation was to preserve the things that Zhe Tianjendi had given to Guhan. When Guhan took everything away, only the trial formation was left. Originally, Guhan could have completely sealed off the trial formation and turned it into his own secret base. However, that would be too selfish. After thinking for a while, Guhan decided to open the trial formation to the public. It would be used to improve the fighting ability of sword-bearers. After all, the survival of the human race was the most important thing. Moreover, opening the trial formation would not affect Guhan's normal use of the other functions of the trial formation. So I went to the main control room of the trial formation to set up the rules. In the future, not only sword-bearers, but also ancient sword-bearers can enter the trial formation. This way, the gate of the trial formation will remain open for a long time, Guhan said. That's great. With this trial formation, the strength of the younger generation of humans will increase a lot. His Majesty Shroud Heaven shouldn't have used such a great place earlier. If it had been in operation for the past 700 years, our human race might have been a few times stronger. Fleeting time, Ling sighed. She did not doubt Jiyu Han's words at all. Well, it would be great if that's the case. Guhan nodded his head. He had managed to cover up his disappearance. But when Guhan looked around, he was furious to find that Song Efei, Yi Wenjun, and Ku Rokin, the 3 sword-bearers of Yuzhang City, were surrounded by others. Both sides pulled out their swords and looked like they were about to fight. If they really fought, Song Efei and Yi Wenjun would probably be in trouble, except for Ku Rokin. Stop! Do you think there's no one in Yuzhang City? Guhan yelled and jumped to Song Efei's side, holding his sword in front of them. Seeing Guhan's sudden appearance, everyone unconsciously took a step back, intimidated by Guhan's imposing manner. There was nothing they could do about it. The battle between Jiyu Han and Durandar was just too shocking. They knew that even if there were 10 of them, they would still not be Jiyu Han's opponent, causing them to secretly feel a trace of or towards Jiyu Han. What? Do you want this king's sword from me too? When Jiyu Han saw these people's expressions, he thought that they wanted to snatch his the arch sword. He questioned them sternly on the spot. Even the sword the arch did not manage to snatch it from his hands. How could he be afraid of these people? If you want the king's sword, take it from me. What kind of sword-bearer are you to bully my friend? No, Comrade Guhan, I think you misunderstood. We have no intention of snatching your king's sword. Messi, the Gemini star of Buenos Aires, stepped forward and said, Comrade Guhan, you should also know that the purpose of so many of us coming here is not to obtain this king's sword, but to bathe in the sword radiance when the king's sword is born and improve our affinity with the sword lady. It's just that you suddenly disappeared just now, Comrade Guhan. All of us thought that you ran away with the king's sword, so we had no choice but to invite these comrades from Yuzhang City to have a chat with us and visit Comrade Guhan's house in the future. Hearing Messi's words, Guhan's anger subsided a lot. Putting himself in their shoes, the people here had wasted a lot of time in the trial array for the sake of this sword gleam. When they saw Jiyu Han suddenly disappear, they would naturally feel like they had lost both their lives and their wealth. It was normal for them to surround Yuzhang City and demand an explanation. On the contrary, it was Guhan who had done something wrong. Is that so? Ling Guhan turned his head to look at Liuanian Ling. Liuanian Ling smiled bitterly and nodded. Guhan knew that this was indeed the case. I'm sorry, I just went to the main control room of the trial array. Guhan repeated what he had said to Liuanian Ling, and the swordbearers immediately felt relieved. It turned out that this person was in a hurry to work for the welfare of the other swordbearers. We were all wrong about him. As a result, the atmosphere on the scene eased up a lot. Messi also took the opportunity to say, Comrade Guhan, since the misunderstanding has been resolved, shouldn't you let us bathe in the king's sword radiance together? We don't want to stay here for another minute. That's naturally not a problem, but... When everyone heard the word "but" that came out of Ji Yuhan's mouth, they thought that Ji Yuhan was going to play some tricks again. Their hearts were in their throats. It's just that I don't know much about the king's sword, so I'm not sure what the sword radiance is all about. Guhan was telling the truth. There were very few records on the internet about the sword radiance when the king's sword was awakened. It only said that when the sword radiance appeared, it could increase the success rate of synchronization of the swordbearers. As for the specific situation, there was no mention of a word. So you don't know about this? Messi heaved a sigh of relief and explained, when the new king's sword touches the first human's sword essence, it will trigger the sword radiance. There hasn't been a new king's sword for hundreds of years, and there's no information about it on the internet. Only the king's sword family knows about it. Is that so? Guhan controlled his sword essence and touched the king's sword in his hand. Then, in an instant, the king's sword emitted a dazzling golden light that blinded everyone's eyes. However, the magical thing was that such a bright light did not hurt their eyes at all. Instead, it touched everyone's heart with a sense of tranquility and warmth. However, under the cover of the golden light, they could not see their surroundings clearly. In the golden light, there was a faint roar of a dragon and a tiger. When the golden light dissipated, their vision was restored. Everyone felt that their bodies were a little different, but no one could tell what was different about them. Is this the sword radiance? Messi lowered his head and muttered to himself. Although he knew about the sword radiance from his family's ancient books, there had not been a new emperor's sword for hundreds of years after all. He was also at a loss as to what the sword radiance was like. It was not until the sword radiance shone on his body that he realized that what the ancient books had said was true. His innate talent had really been improved. Good sister, let's go back to Buenos Aires immediately. Messi hugged his sister, Miran, excitedly. I have a feeling that I can finally synchronize with Yuan. Really, brother? Miran was also very excited when she heard her brother say that. Both she and her brother had surpassed the limit of 10,000 quarks of sword essence. They could become sword bearers at the famed sword level. However, her brother could not synchronize with the sword maiden that they wanted. That was why he had been stuck at the treasured sword level. Now that Messi suddenly said that he could succeed, how could Miran not be excited? That's right. I've always had a feeling that the connection between me and Yuan is just a little bit away. Now that this little bit has been filled by the sword radiance, I can definitely synchronize with Yuan this time. Messi was getting more excited as he spoke. He suddenly grabbed Guhan's arm. Comrade Guhan, since you can control this trial formation, how do we leave this place now? You just have to shout that you will send me away. Ji Yuhan laughed. Send me out. Messi shouted without hesitation, and then disappeared from the hall. You're so annoying. Wait for me, brother. Miran pouted and followed Messi out of the trial formation. Seeing that their leader had left, the swordbearers of Buenos Aires could only smile wryly and follow them out of the place one by one. When they heard Messi's words, some of the sword-bearers who also had more than 10,000 quarks of sword essence could not help but want to return to their sword tower base city to synchronize with the sword maidens that they wanted. As a result, the sword-bearers from other cities also left the hall one after another. Soon, only the sword-bearers from Yuzhang City and Yangjing City were left here. Guhan, all of you come back to Yangjing City with us. Grandpa Haotian just said that your sword immortals also want you to go to Yangjing City for shelter, Liuyan Ling said to Guhan. She really wanted Guhan to go back to Yangjing City with her, but she knew very well that Guhan would not go with her. Sure enough, Guhan shook his head very firmly. Yuzhang City is the place where I was born and raised. Without Yuzhang City, there would be no Guhan today. Now that Yuzhang City is in trouble, how can I leave? At least you have a conscience. Ku Rokin sneered. I don't want to see you being unreasonable. I'm leaving first. See you in Yuzhang City. With that, Ku Rokin disappeared from the hall. He had already left the trial formation. This guy. Guhan shook his head and pushed Yi Wenjun and Song Yifei in front of Liuyan Ling. Please take them to Yangjing City. What do you mean, Guhan? Don't you think I was born and raised in Yuzhang City? What right do you have to make decisions for me? Song Yifei said with a grimace. He was obviously very dissatisfied with Guhan's actions. Mr. Guhan, Wenjun is the descendant of Zhetian Jendi. Yuzhang City is the root of our Yi family. I, Yi Wenjun, can't just run away like this. Yi Wenjun also said very sincerely. This was not a melodramatic drama. Guhan did not try to force them to be safe. Guhan patted their shoulders. Okay, let's go back together. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.